Chapter 730. Your Majesty! Renbachien reached out and held the Empress's hand. Then he held Lin Xiaola's collar, who was snoring and drooling. An idea popped into Renbachien's mind. It would be interesting if Lin Xiaola was left naked in Deyo when the clothes arrived. It was just a thought. He knew that Lin Xiaola would definitely be taken away if she wasn't overweight. Unless she was 50 kilograms heavier than him and he didn't touch her, such a situation would only occur. The air around them began to distort. At this moment, a red line suddenly appeared and crashed into Renbachien's chest. When the surroundings changed, they were back in the courtyard of the villa, where the carriage was previously placed. The temperature had also changed from extremely hot to cold. The cold air made Renbachien feel comfortable from head to toe. Renbachien used to hate the winter in the northeast. It was very cold, but Deyo was extremely hot all year round. This made him miss this cold feeling. Lin Xiaola was still snoring in Renbachien's arms. She even wiped her drool. The Empress, on the other hand, had a faint smile on her face as she stretched out her arm and carried a small red object. It was about the size of a teddy bear and slightly smaller than an ordinary fox. It had a pair of wings, a red back, and a white abdomen. Its small head was baring its teeth at the Empress, making a fierce look. This fellow, I've finally seen someone walk right into the trap. Renbachien was surprised to see the little thing in the Empress's hands. This thing seems to be very interested in you. The Empress sized up the little thing with great interest. The Bichi was a very rare beast in legends. It could be said to be a symbol of misfortune. Its speed determined that most people could only see its back occasionally. Unless it was willing, it would be difficult for others to touch it. Even the Empress couldn't catch up with its speed. However, no one expected it to walk right into the trap at this time. Whether I'm in Deyo or on Earth, I don't know where this thing is hiding. It will only appear when I travel. I reckon that something attracted it at that moment, Renbachien said after pondering for a while. That should be the case. The Empress nodded. After so many times, did your Majesty find anything? Renbachien asked curiously. The Empress shook her head and replied, No. The only thing I could sense was that there was a change in the air before we traveled, as if something had been opened. What is it? A passage between two worlds. Renbachien nodded. He didn't know if this passage was what attracted the Bichi. Perhaps there was something else, but he hadn't discovered it yet. Unfortunately, it couldn't speak. Renbachien went forward and scratched its exposed belly. The Bichi immediately struggled with all its might and kicked its claws randomly, causing several scratches on Renbachien's hand. Behave yourself. Is this male or female? Renbachien took the risk of getting more than a dozen bloody scratches on his hands, pulled open its legs, and looked around curiously. The Bichi immediately exploded and kept barking at him. Woof! Woof woof! Woof woof woof! If it wasn't for the fact that it was being held tightly by the Empress, it would have fought to the death with Renbachien. Should I prepare a cage for it? Renbachien thought about putting this thing in a cage and sending it to the capital of Great Xia. He reckoned that there wouldn't be many people in Great Xia after a few years. The Empress liked the big round eyes of the Bichi, and her face was full of love. Forget it, it's just a small thing. It doesn't matter if it's a blessing or a misfortune, it looks quite pitiful, and it's not good to bully it. The Empress stretched out her other hand and touched its head before letting go. The Bichi immediately turned into a red shadow, pounced on Renbachien's face, and scratched his face. Ouch! Just as Renbachien cried out, the little thing disappeared. You have offended it badly. The Empress pursed her lips and laughed. Renbachien looked aggrieved and said, Your Majesty, don't laugh, I'm disfigured. I just need to apply some ointment, the Empress said casually. This little thing is actually quite smart. The bloody scratches on your face look scary, but it's actually not a big deal. This little thing has barbs on its claws, and if it wants to, it can tear off a piece of flesh. Renbachien sighed. This was an undeserved calamity. Wasn't it just to see if it was male or female? No matter how smart this thing was, it was still a beast. Did it have any moral values? Forget it, he didn't want to think about it anymore. Renbachien turned his head and saw a row of winged cavalry warriors standing there obediently. Greetings, boss. Greetings, lady boss. 10 lashes for each of you to remember. Remember to bring a whip next time, the Empress said faintly. Everyone immediately responded without any hesitation. Wake up, we're at our stop. Ren Baqin threw Lin Xiaola on the ground and gently kicked her butt. Lin Xiaola rubbed her eyes and got up from the ground. What's this place called again? Lin Xiaola looked at the courtyard and the villa in front of her and realized that she was no longer in Deyo. Let's go in and change. Ren Baqin slapped the back of her head and threw her a piece of white rabbit creamy candy. This fully demonstrated what it meant to be slapped and given a piece of candy. The winged cavalry warriors heaved a sigh of relief after they entered the villa to change. This punishment seemed heavy, but it was actually very light. It was already good enough that the Empress didn't skin them alive. The Empress minded her own business and returned to her room. Ren Baqian's job was to change Lin Xiaola's clothes. It sounded like a benefit, but Ren Baqian wasn't interested in her flat figure. He would have seen it many times if he wanted to. She usually wore a tube top and shorts when she slept. Her sleeping posture wasn't good, and there wasn't much to show. Ren Baqin felt that he might as well look at himself instead of her. At least his chest muscles were bigger. He took out a t-shirt and threw it to her. Wear it the same as last time. Previously, when the Empress was besieged in Tianjing Basin, Ren Baqin brought Lin Xiaola, Qing Yuan, and Hong Yuan here once, so they knew how to wear their clothes. Oh! Lin Xiaola grunted and took off her clothes. She was still wearing a tube top and a pair of shorts inside. She then put the t-shirt over her body like a robe. The hem of the t-shirt reached her knees, and half of her shoulders were exposed. Lin Xiaola was very skinny, and her appearance was different from the wildness of the aboriginals. Instead, she was delicate and pretty like a little white flower. Now that she was wearing a robe, she looked like a little girl next door with a pure and soft aura. After returning her clothes, her eyelids started to struggle. She fell onto the bed and moaned comfortably on the soft mattress. Ren Baqin turned his head to take a look after changing his clothes. The Empress wanted her to be his bodyguard when he returned to Earth in the future. No matter who saw her youthful and soft appearance, they wouldn't think that she was dangerous. In fact, she didn't hold back when she killed people and didn't feel guilty at all. It was as if she was drinking water or more vividly like a wild beast hunting. Ren Baqin gave Yang Sen a call to confirm the itinerary. When he went downstairs, he saw the Empress in a red dress sitting on the sofa eating ice cream. It's 9 o'clock in the morning now. We will set off in an hour and arrive at the destination in the evening, Ren Baqin said as he sat beside the Empress. Oh, this is the last one left. The Empress pointed to the wrapper of the Xiaola ice cream on the table. This was much more important than what Ren Baqin said. An hour later, 3 cars stopped in front of Ren Baqin's villa. Your Majesty, let's go. Ren Baqin stood up and pulled the Empress to the second floor to bring Lin Xiaola down. He didn't know what was waiting for him on this trip to the north. Ren Baqin was more or less looking forward to it. Recommend my friends, Master Chef. Chapter 731. It's snowing. Ren Baqin walked out of the station and stretched out his palms to welcome the falling snowflakes. Towards snow, his feelings were still quite deep. It snows 5 months a year in the Northeast. Many of his childhood memories were related to snow. That included the 2 brothers making a snowman. In the end, he made a pile of snow and stuffed Ren Wanyan into it. That was how a freshly baked snowman was made. However, in recent years, they had rarely seen snow. They had only seen it once during the Chinese New Year 2 years ago. They hadn't even seen it last year. What is this? Lin Xiaola finally woke up after sleeping all the way. She looked at the falling snowflakes curiously. However, the others looked at her curiously. She was still wearing the t-shirt that Ren Baqin had casually thrown at her. Everything below his knees was exposed, and he only had a half-sleeved shirt on his upper body. No matter how one looked at him, he did not look like a normal person in this season. What is this? It's like the ice in the palace. Lin Xiaola patted the snowflakes on her face with a satisfied expression. Miss Lin is really naive and romantic, Yang Sen said with a laugh by the side. Ren Baqin looked at her, nodded and said, "You can say that." Both he and the Empress were wearing overcoats that Yang Sen had brought over. Lin Xiaola also had one, but she didn't really like it. Ren Baqien threw a white rabbit creamy candy over, waved his hand and said, "Let's go." There were 3 cars with special license plates waiting outside. There were 2 cars at the front and back, and there were capable men standing in front of each car. Ren Baqien, the Empress, and the Empress boarded the car in the middle. On the way, the sky darkened. Their destination was a courtyard in the imperial capital. There was a big iron gate outside, and inside was a small 2-story building. The first floor was lit up. A young man brought the 3 of them to the door and pressed the doorbell. The one who opened the door was an old man with jet black hair. He smiled and said, "Welcome. My identity is inconvenient, so I can't personally pick you up. Did you neglect me along the way?" "Boss, you are too serious," Ren Baqien immediately replied. "Boss? Ha." The old man immediately laughed and extended his hand to Ren Baqien. "It's been a few years, and I finally get to see you in person." It wouldn't be appropriate to say that he was being courteous, but he was indeed very gentle and treated Ren Baqien as an equal. His opponent's hand was steady and strong. This surprised Ren Baqien. After all, given his age, it was indeed surprising that his palms were so strong. "Boss, have you practiced the 9th set of qi?" Ren Baqien immediately understood. That's right, the name of this basic technique that was suitable for ordinary people to cultivate was the 9th body-nourishing qigong. This is the 11th set. First meet, then chat. "Miss Qi, may I know what the etiquette is in your country?" "Etiquette doesn't matter." "I don't care about that," the Empress said casually. Lady Qi also holds a high position in the blessed and heavenly enclave. She is truly a woman who is not inferior to men. The old man laughed and said, "You're wrong. Only ordinary people say that women are not inferior to men. People like Miss Qi naturally can't say that." Even though the Empress's identity wasn't made clear, from what Ren Baqien had said when he was holding the weapon and the information gathered from other sources, it was inferred that the Empress held a high position in the paradise. It was just that they weren't sure of her exact identity. "And this is?" The old man looked at Lin Xiaola, who was trying hard to separate her upper and lower eyelids. This girl wasn't in her information. "Her surname is Lin. Just pretend that she doesn't exist. Please come in." The room was decorated in a Chinese style with walnut and vermilion furniture. Even though Ren Baqien couldn't tell if it was made of solid wood, such a high-ranking big shot couldn't possibly use laminated wood, right? "This is my wife. These are Mr. Ren, Miss Qi, and Miss Lin, whom I have mentioned to you before." The old man introduced a woman in the room to them. "I have seen Madam on television many times. I didn't expect to have such an opportunity this time." Ren Baqien laughed. After they sat down, the old woman poured tea for them, and the old man said, "I have known about you for a few years. Back then, you were running around everywhere, and I only came back after contacting you. I have wanted to meet you for a long time, but I never had the chance. Either I wasn't free, or I couldn't find you. Now, my wish has been fulfilled. There will be plenty of opportunities. With your current physique and cultivation of life nourishment, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future." Ren Baqien laughed. While they were chatting, Lin Xiaola finally couldn't open her eyes. She slumped to the side and fell asleep. Ren Baqien noticed it, but pretended not to see it. In any case, the old man had a big belly and wouldn't stoop to her level. He couldn't figure out Lin Xiaola's identity and pretended not to see it. At this age, who can say for sure what will happen in the future? Moreover, I have come down now and don't have any duties. I won't have to worry so much in the future. The old man laughed. "You have come down?" Ren Baqien was stunned. The old man was also stunned by his reaction. He then shook his head and laughed. Although it wasn't a big deal for him to come down, the other party's reaction was that he didn't know anything. "I came down last year. I've finally settled some of the matters that I need to attend to, so I can finally relax now," the old man explained. Only then did Ren Baqien react. Last year, 2023, the other party should have come down. In other words, the person in charge had changed. Just as the Empress had said, a new ruler would have a new court. The leaders on Earth would change every 8 to 10 years. After a few decades, there would be a few changes, and it was hard to say how they would view him at that time. It had only been a few years, and the new generation actually didn't contact him. It wasn't that he was awesome. After all, his identity was special, and he had the so-called paradise behind him. He was a little surprised that the new generation didn't contact him. However, you don't have to worry. After all, with your identities, no matter who is in charge, it won't affect you. The current generation actually wanted to contact you for a long time, but I haven't finished handing over some matters. This time, besides fulfilling a wish, I invited you here to introduce you, the old man continued, seeming to read Rinpoche's mind. Don't tell me that you don't want to chat with an old man like me now that I'm no longer in charge? The old man chuckled. How is that possible? Rinpoche laughed. Many people can't even dream of chatting with the big boss. That's good. Don't call me big boss. Call me Mr., the old man said. Mr. Rinpoche nodded. I've been curious about the paradise for a long time. I wonder if you can tell me a little about it? Previously, when I heard the two of you talking, I always felt that the paradise and this world are of the same origin. Just like how Miss Chi addressed herself as Zhen, which has been used since ancient times in our country. During the Qin dynasty, the first emperor, under Li Si's suggestion, used this word as a unique title for the emperor. I wonder if the word Zhen in the paradise is a form of address or a unique title. My wife is a professor of literature. After so many years, I'm also very interested in these things. Rinpoche's eyes flickered. Was the old man really just curious? Or could he judge something from this word? He didn't dare to miss a word when talking to someone like the old man. Furthermore, they were talking about the paradise. It's a form of address, not a unique title, Rinpoche said after thinking for a while. Chapter 732. Apart from Shi Qing, Rinpoche, the Empress, and all the other officials in the imperial court wouldn't be able to handle such a person. Whether it was in terms of his keen political sense, emotional intelligence, or cultural foundation. Even though Rinpoche was very careful, the other party still managed to get a lot of useful information from his casual conversation. Even if the other party didn't deliberately use this method to get information, he could still see some clues from Rinpoche's answers. This was probably a kind of instinct. After chatting for 3 hours and having a very ordinary dinner, Rinpoche arranged to meet the other party the next day before leaving with Lin Xiaola and the Empress. I'm hungry. Let's eat, the Empress said as soon as they left the house. She couldn't even bring herself to eat the food for dinner. It was gone in one mouthful. After waking Lin Xiaola up, the three of them found a place to eat the entire hot pot restaurant. Yang Sen's eyes almost popped out. The place arranged for them was a good hotel. Rinpoche didn't know why they only booked 2 suites. Rinpoche pondered for a while. Would he share a suite with Lin Xiaola or the Empress? What are you thinking about? The Empress glanced at him while they were in the elevator. I'm thinking about whether to let Lin Xiaola share a suite with you, Rinpoche said bluntly. No. The Empress rejected him without hesitation. Then she can only share a suite with me. Rinpoche looked at Lin Xiaola with disdain. Xinji's figure was much better than Lin Xiaola's. Furthermore, she was a bespectacled lady. No matter how he looked at it, she was better than Lin Xiaola, who only ate and slept. The Empress looked at him and said, You and I share a suite. That's good. Rinpoche immediately laughed. He had always supported this kind of suggestion. However, since it was a suite, it was divided into inner and outer rooms. Rinpoche naturally sat on the sofa. Voluntarily. Really? As they sat on the sofa, Rinpoche suddenly asked, What does your Majesty wear when you sleep? The Empress blushed and rolled her eyes at him. Do you want to see? With the wedding date set, the Empress seemed to be getting used to certain topics and not being so sensitive. I want to see. Rinpoche nodded his head and was kicked to the wall by the Empress. It's a lie that I don't want to see it. If I don't want to see it, will Her Majesty blame me? Rinpoche asked while covering his nose. The Empress seriously thought about this question and said, I will beat you to death. Why did you kick me then? Ren Baqian felt wronged. The Empress's answer was simple and to the point. Ren Baqian, in any case, he would be beaten if he didn't want to see it, but he would be beaten if he wanted to see it, right? When can you be more reasonable, Your Majesty? Ren Baqian lamented. Do you think I'm being unreasonable now? The Empress looked at him and sneered. From her words, Ren Baqian could tell that she used to call Xiao Tian, but now she was calling her Madame Niu. Ren Baqian felt that he wouldn't end up well if he continued to discuss the issue of reason with the Empress. It was a mistake to discuss this issue, and it had to be corrected. I was wrong. The words from His Majesty's mouth were the truth. If anyone dares to say no, just kill and bury them. Ren Baqian made a solemn vow. What are your thoughts after seeing that person today, Your Majesty? Ren Baqian changed the topic. Too weak, the Empress said without hesitation. As for other things, her focus was completely different from Ren Baqian's. Naturally, the conclusions that they reached were very different. After watching TV until midnight, the Empress swayed her body and entered the room. Ren Baqian leaned on the sofa and watched the door close. Looking at the time, there were still more than 8 months before the wedding. This period of time was really long. The next day, after breakfast, a car took the three of them to the most mysterious place in the entire imperial capital. Ren Baqian was very curious and even a little nervous along the way. However, when he arrived, he realized that it was somewhat different from what he had imagined. The sentries everywhere were similar to what he had imagined. In addition, the scenery was pretty good. As for the rest, many famous places were just ordinary-looking bungalows. If it was in other places, it would at most have some historical value and could be visited. Other than that, there weren't many things that people would pay attention to. What was really worth paying attention to was the person who lived here. In a parlor, Ren Baqian finally met the successor of that old man. Yesterday, he went back and checked on his phone, so he more or less knew a little about him. He was about 10 years younger than the old man, but his hair had already turned white. When the two of them stood together, it was hard to tell who was older and who was younger. This place has received presidents and dignitaries from various countries, but this is the first time that the two of you have such statuses. Even I will be recorded in the annals of history. The other party laughed. Ren Baqian really didn't consider whether he would be recorded in the annals of Earth's history. However, even if he was recorded, he was afraid that it would be an unknown part of history. Just like those people and things that were buried in history. It was a little different from the serious conversation that he had expected. After the four of them met, they simply sat in the room and chatted as if they were just trying to get to know each other. Not to mention that the other party was very busy, he had a lot of things to do every day. Ren Baqian didn't believe that the other party would spend half a day sitting here just to get to know each other. After a simple lunch, they finally got down to business. This time, we were negligent in our work and caused some trouble for Mr. Ren. Although it's harmless, it affected our mood. With this experience, we will be strict in this area in the future. I don't need you. I will send 1,000 people from the paradise to be stationed here, the Empress said directly. The Empress's words were very direct. She didn't want to beat around the bush with the other party because that wasn't her forte. Without any probing or giving the other party any time to react, she said what she wanted to say. 1,000 people wouldn't be a big deal if they were ordinary people. However, if there were 1,000 experts, then it would not be a small matter. The two of them carefully looked at the Empress and then at Ren Baqian, but they didn't directly object. Instead, they thought for a while and said, 1,000 people isn't a small number. I'm afraid it will be a little troublesome to make arrangements. After all, they aren't ordinary people, and it will be easy to cause a disturbance with them. I'm not asking, the Empress said directly. The other party smiled. If it wasn't an inquiry, then it was a notification. Although the other party was surprised by this matter, he wasn't surprised by the Empress's attitude. After all, with her strength, it would be strange if she spoke to them like a politician. However, 1,000 people would probably cause a lot of trouble in the country. 2 hours later, Ren Baqian and the Empress finally left the reception hall. The other party agreed to the Empress's request for 1,000 experts. In fact, it was difficult for the other party to object. However, for the rest of the time, the few of them discussed another matter. They were building a new city in the country. Wuji City. Or rather, Wuji City. As the name suggested, the function and significance of this city could be seen from its name. As the peak of martial arts, it was also the highest point. For the time being, it wasn't only the temporary settlement for 1,000 people, but also the martial arts training base in the country. This was a city that wasn't open to the public. After the spread of martial arts, this place became the gathering place for experts from all over the world. From a certain point of view, Renbaqian and the Empress's 1,000 people had become the signboard of this place. With these 1,000 people here, this place would become the target of all the experts in the country and even the world. In a future where the entire world was changing, the value of this city could be said to be immeasurable. At the same time, the other party could also use this city to gather the most uncontrollable group of people. Renbaqian suspected that the other party had been thinking about this problem for a long time. In any case, he could be said to be working with the country to plan for the future. The gains were huge. Of course, Renbaqian also made a series of other agreements with the other party. Chapter 733. After the trip to the north, Renbaqian and the Empress returned to their villa in Shanghai and hurried back to Deyo. When he returned to Earth again, it was exactly 21 days later. As soon as he returned, he received news that the location of Wuji City had been chosen. There were a few locations to choose from. One was the prairie in the north, and the other was the plateau in the west. It was easier to prohibit ordinary people from entering. However, they were all rejected by Renbaqian. In such a sparsely populated place, an inexplicable nuclear test could destroy the entire Wuji City. Although the possibility wasn't high, it couldn't be avoided. Under his strong request, the location was set in Jiangqing, which was already very densely populated. With a rough location, it was much easier to choose a location. However, Renbaqian was still a little surprised that the address could be chosen in 21 days. After all, this was a new city. Furthermore, it was a special city that rejected ordinary people. There were too many aspects to consider, such as traffic, the environment, the surrounding cities, and the impact on ordinary people. This confirmed Renbaqian's intuition that the other party probably had this idea for a long time and didn't come up with it on the spur of the moment. Even the blueprint of Wuji City had been sent to Renbaqian. This was because Renbaqian had a piece of land in Wuji City, which was close to the city center. It was about 1 square kilometer of land. According to the plan, Wuji City occupied more than 300 square kilometers and could accommodate millions of people. It was designed to be the smallest super city in the future. From this, it could be seen that the value of 1 square kilometer of land could reach a terrifying figure in the future. 1 square kilometer didn't sound like much, but Renbaqian had a lease period of 300 years. The length and width of the land were 1,000 meters, which was equivalent to 140 standard soccer fields. Whether he built a mansion, a high-rise building, an apartment, or a shopping mall on this land was entirely up to him. The more than 300 square kilometers of Wuji City also included a lot of infrastructure, such as roads, schools, parks, hospitals, and so on. In addition, there was another special thing about Wuji City. It was a city with walls. The original purpose of the city walls was to defend against wild beasts and foreign enemies, which was very far from a peaceful modern society. However, in order to facilitate management and isolate ordinary people, Wuji City was still designed with walls. The walls were up to 20 meters high and surrounded the entire city, separating the inside and the outside into 2 parts. Renbaqian held the plan and looked at it for 2 days. Finally, he chose a plot of land and sent it back. Renbaqian estimated that with the nation's power, it would take at least 2 to 3 years for most of the facilities to be completed. That was 1 year in Deyo time. It just so happened that after his wedding with the Empress. But before that, he should start working on his own piece of land. According to his idea, part of it would be built into a mansion, part of it would be built into a martial arts center, and the other part would be a mix of commercial buildings and residential areas. He called Ren Wanyan and Ding Jie over. The two of them wanted to laugh when they saw Renbaqian. This was because Renbaqian's face was covered in scratches. He didn't know if it was because of that fairy-like woman. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't imagine that a woman like that would scratch people. Only Renbachien knew that this was because he was scratched by the Bichi on his way here. That bastard, it seemed like he bore a grudge against him, scratching him with his claws the moment he saw him. Wasn't it just to see if it was male or female? Sooner or later he would find a chance to deal with it. Renbachien first asked about the two of them. Ding Jie was now in his 3rd year of university and had grown a lot taller. He had experienced more things in the past 3 years than he had in the past 10 years. He had matured a lot, and his speech and actions had become more capable. The same went for Renwanyan. Renbachien projected the plan on the wall. Look at this plan. What's this? Boss, you want to do real estate? Which city is this? Ding Jie looked at the plan on the wall carefully and was able to figure out something. In the past few years, he had dabbled in other things besides his subject. After all, he wasn't like other students who didn't know where his future lay. Learning more things was always good for him and could make the boss value him more. This is the plan for a new city, Renbachien said slowly as he sat on the sofa and held a cup of tea. Both of you have practiced the 9th set of life technique and naturally know the use of this technique. The two of them looked at each other and nodded. The future will change. A new branch of the human race will appear, and a new choice will be made. Not only will we pursue technological progress, but we will also pursue our own evolution and strength. The 9th set of life technique is the first step. The two of them were taken aback. A new choice for the future of the human race? To pursue our own evolution and strength? This was too arrogant. Brother, what level can we reach by practicing this? Renwanyan asked doubtfully. After practicing this technique, he gained a little more strength and a little faster. He believed in this life force qigong. However, he didn't know what level it could reach. According to his thinking, it would at most reach the level of the people in the villa who could use cars as fitness equipment. Although this was already very shocking, it was still too exaggerated to say that it was a branch of the human race's future. What level? Renbachien pondered for a while. They can still catch bullets with their bare hands. A real expert can crush a mountain with one punch. It's just like those Xianxia movies you watch. Although they aren't that powerful, they can still change the course of human development. This, crush a mountain with one punch, was, of course, referring to Li Fu. When developed to the extreme, it would probably reach the level of Li Fu. The two of them gasped and murmured, "Unbelievable!" It's indeed hard to believe, but I saw it with my own eyes, so you don't have to doubt it. I'm just telling you about the possible future. Under such circumstances, the announcement of this technique will definitely have an impact on the world's perception, and the structure of the entire world will also change. Boss, are you planning for the martial arts centers? Ding Jie immediately asked. Renbachien nodded and continued. The country is also planning for it, and this Wuji city is one of the most important points. Wuji is the limit of martial arts. You should understand the meaning of the name. This city will be the gathering place for all the martial arts experts in the future. At this point, Renbachien suddenly paused, and the idea of holding a martial arts conference in Wuji City came to mind. If a martial arts conference could be held in Wuji City every year, this city would naturally gather the experts from all over the world, and it would be worthy of its name. In any case, the prize money would still be his in the end. Or he could find the country to sponsor it and earn a sum of money when the time came. After putting this idea aside for the time being, Renbachien continued, this city covers an area of more than 300 square kilometers, and I have 1 square kilometer of land at my disposal. The two of them sucked in a breath of cold air. Although they knew that Renbachien had a very high status and had a considerable relationship with some government departments, they didn't expect him to be so capable. According to him, this city would probably be the center of the country in the future. Renbachien was actually given 1 square kilometer of land for such an important city? Brother, what did you do? Renwanyan was speechless. His brother was becoming more and more incomprehensible. You don't have to worry about this. You just need to know that I have 1 square kilometer of land in this city. This is the opportunity for you to show your abilities. Make a plan to maximize the use of this 1 square kilometer of land. My initial idea is to build a building with the first to third floors as the headquarters of the Martial Arts Center. The fourth and above floors can be used for other purposes, and the top floor can be used as my residence. Other than that, you can think about how to plan the rest of the area. Both business and accommodation are needed, and there should be at least enough to accommodate thousands of people. A hotel is also a good choice. I will leave this matter to you, but remember to keep it a secret. No matter who it is, you can't tell anyone about this. Ren Baqian's voice deepened, and the two of them immediately became nervous. Even though Ren Wanyan was his younger brother, he still felt a little nervous when his older brother spoke in such a serious tone. Boss, what about the scale of the investment? Ding Jie asked. 1 square kilometer of land wasn't a small number to build. Tens of billions of yuan might not even be enough. Moreover, Ren Baqian didn't seem to be selling houses like those real estate developers, so funding was a big problem. You don't have to think about this matter. Just make the plan. Ren Baqian said casually. This surprised the two of them again, and they didn't know how much assets Ren Baqian had now. In fact, Ren Baqian still had a few hundred million yuan, mainly from the dividends from the pharmaceutical factory. A few hundred million yuan seemed like a lot, but it was just a drop in the bucket. However, he didn't have to pay for the construction of this land. Wasn't there a bank? Wasn't there a loan? In any case, there was definitely no problem with a low-interest loan. Tens of billions of yuan was a lot for others, but it wasn't a huge figure for the national bank. If there was a need, it wouldn't be a problem to borrow more. As for the repayment date, it would be 300 years later. It could be said that money was the least of his concerns at the moment. After leaving this matter to the two of them, Ren Baqian waited to see the results. Even if their plans weren't in line with his own ideas, it would at least give him some ideas. After that, he returned to Dayo and continued on his journey. Chapter 734. Dayo was vast and sparsely populated. To what extent? Apart from the 60,000 mountains, the land area of Dayo was about 1/4 the size of China. Tianjing Basin occupied 1/6 of the total area, which was 400,000 square kilometers. It was equivalent to the area of 2 ordinary provinces and accommodated 10 million people. The remaining 2 million square kilometers was equivalent to 10 ordinary provinces, but there were less than 4 million aboriginals. There were more than 10 million aboriginals, and 10 million of them lived in the 60,000 mountains. 10 provinces covered an area of only 4 million people. From this, it could be seen how sparsely populated Dayo was. It was common for one to not see a village for 2 to 3 days. The further they got from Lan City, the more desolate it became. Other than the barren mountains and forests where various ferocious beasts lived, there were boundless grasslands where large herds of fork-horned cows and jumping goats were raised. Tens of thousands of fork-horned cows and jumping sheep were moving on the grassland. It was a spectacular scene. However, he was most vexed about the road here. There were almost no roads. There was only one bumpy dirt road, which was much worse than the roads in other places. After the rain, it was all muddy, and the wheels often got stuck in the mud. Just like that, he treaded forward for a week and finally neared his final destination before entering the 60,000 mountains. When the towering mountain peaks could be seen in the distance, Ren Baqian and the others finally arrived at the last and largest city in the 60,000 mountains. It was also the port of communication between the 60,000 mountains and the outside world, Yi City. It was also called Barbarian City. This city had been left behind by the previous dynasty of the Hao Nation. Barbarians was how they addressed the aboriginals. It also meant that one would be in the wilderness after passing through this city. Even though the Hao Nation had perished for 70 years, the name of this city had been passed down. Even the aboriginals called this city Man City most of the time. Lieutenant Zhang Jushan of the Protectorate of the South greets Your Majesty. 1,000 soldiers came to welcome him. They were also dressed in leather armor and had long sabers. However, he felt that there was something different about them. They seemed to be more ferocious than the soldiers in other places. The Empress lifted the curtain to let the soldiers outside see her. Then, she said faintly, "Let's enter the city first." After traveling for another half a day, they were getting closer and closer to Ya City. However, what attracted him the most was still the mountains in the distance. Mountain peaks stood erect like pillars between the heavens and the earth, piercing straight into the clouds. At a rough glance, there were at least 100 such mountains. It was an extremely spectacular sight. Between these mountain peaks, there were many shorter mountain ranges that meandered up and down, with no end in sight. Looking at it from here, there were only mountains, and nothing else could be seen. That was the 60,000 mountains. When he arrived at the foot of Ya City, he finally shifted his attention to it. The city walls were all built with gray boulders and were filled with coldness. There were sharp protrusions on top of the city walls, like the fangs of a wild beast, covering the entire city walls. These sharp fang-like protrusions had been used to prevent the Aboriginals from attacking the city. Who knew how much blood of the Aboriginals and Jing tribe had flowed on them? After entering Tooth City, there were rows of tall stone houses. The doors were 3 meters tall, and the houses were 4 meters tall. There were no decorations, and it was filled with a simple and unadorned feeling. What he was more concerned about were the Aboriginal commoners who stopped to watch from both sides of the road. Some wore cloth clothes, some wore animal skins, some were bare-chested and had tattoos all over their bodies, and some even wore clothes woven from grass. Some had bird feathers tied to their heads, some had beast tails on their shoulders, some had snakes coiled around their bodies, some had lowing horns on their necks, and many had rows of fangs on their necks. There were also all kinds of tamed beasts. There was a white saber-toothed tiger, a black man who exuded a strong aura, a giant snake with gold and silver patterns, a monkey that was about the size of a human, and a giant bird that was as tall as 2 people. It was a bizarre and dazzling scene. Rinpoche felt as if he had entered another world. There was only one thing in common, and that was that all of them exuded a wild aura. Those people are from different regions. The people of each region have their own unique characteristics, which is a way to show their identity. For example, those with bird feathers tied to their heads are from Haishan. Those with beast tails, such as the tail of a saber-toothed tiger, are from Red Earth Peak. Those with a furry raccoon tail are from Stony Mountain. The Empress said as she looked at the various men and women outside. "Has your Majesty been here before?" Rinpoche turned his head and asked. "I came here once when I was young," the Empress replied faintly. "Your Majesty's memory is really good." Rinpoche was speechless. It had been more than 10 years since she was young, yet she still remembered it so clearly. She was indeed a cheat-like player. "They are my people, so I naturally have to remember them," the Empress said as she stood up, pulled open the curtains of the imperial carriage, stepped out, and stood there looking down at the crowd. "It's the little Emperor. The little Emperor is back. Her Majesty is back." There was a commotion outside, and many people were shouting that the little Emperor was back. Their voices were filled with joy. It seemed that seeing the Empress made them very happy. However, the Empress had been on the throne for 9 years, but in the eyes of these Aboriginals who were far away from Lon City, she was still a little emperor. "Your Majesty, do you still remember Yangchuan village on Red Earth Peak? You even rested in our village back then. I even ate at Yangchuan village on Red Earth Peak. It was a golden feathered eagle that my father hunted." Someone immediately shouted. These people didn't know any etiquette, but there was a kind of simplicity in the mountains. Although their voices were messy, it made the Empress feel peaceful from the bottom of her heart. "Don't shout. Why are you shouting in front of Her Majesty?" The general who had welcomed the Empress immediately reprimanded the commoners by the roadside. "It's nothing." The Empress waved her hand, looked around, and said calmly, "I came back this time to enter the mountains and see if you are doing well. It's fine, but salt is too expensive now. Also, no one is buying animal hides." Someone immediately shouted, "This is temporary. There is a war in the north now. When we win, there will be a large number of salt fields, and the price of salt will drop. You can keep the animal hides for now. Someone will buy them in a few days," the Empress said calmly to the crowd. "That's great. If there is a shortage of manpower during the war, let us know. My son was one step too late last time and didn't become a soldier. I will. The Empress laughed. Little Emperor, are you going to get married? Someone suddenly shouted. The Empress nodded her head and smiled. Yes, someone will send news about my marriage soon. Chapter 735. Boo! As soon as Rinpochen came out and stood there, he was met with loud cheers. It made him feel like he wasn't in City, but Diyun society. Rinpochen's body was considered extremely strong for an ordinary person, but in the eyes of the Aboriginals, he was still thin and weak. In particular, his appearance was too feminine according to the aesthetic standards of the Aboriginals. He lacked that fierce aura and was simply a gigolo. The Aboriginals didn't have such a term, but it felt similar. Rinpochen felt that he was quite innocent. With his current appearance, he would be considered a strong man on earth, but in the eyes of the Aboriginals, he was still a gigolo. It could only be said that this was a racial restriction. The Empress and Rinpochen showed up in the city and then moved into the general's residence. Although there was no general in this city, there was a general's residence that had at least a few hundred years of history. Fortunately, the style of the residence was the same as that of the city. It was built with huge stones and hadn't changed much even after hundreds of years of wind and frost. It was just that it had been poorly taken care of. Even though it had been tidied up before the Empress arrived, it still looked a little old. The group stayed in City for 3 days. Rinpochen first made a trip back to Earth and brought back the crocodile meat to give away. The crocodile limbs that were sent to the Messier 87 department were finally found to be effective after various tests. One of them was that the crocodile meat contained a lot of energy and could strengthen the muscles and bones, which was extremely useful for practitioners. This was needless to say since it was an earthwheel-level beast after all. It also had the effect of prolonging one's life. Although it wasn't as effective as elixirs, such as the jade embryo, which could extend one's life by 20 years and preserve one's appearance, it was still extremely effective and was already a rare treasure for earthlings. Secondly, the crocodile liver could produce new blood, which was also extremely important for older practitioners. The heart of the crocodile could nourish the heart and calm the nerves, and it could even cure some heart diseases. The tail of the crocodile had the best effect of prolonging one's life, strengthening one's body, and reducing cell aging. According to speculation, if an ordinary person ate the entire crocodile, their life would be extended by at least 10 years. This showed how precious this giant earthwheel crocodile was. The only pity was that this crocodile didn't have much effect on earthwheel experts, who had a much longer lifespan than ordinary people. It just so happened that Rinpochen had obtained a plot of land in Wuji City. As such, he did them a favor at little cost and brought back some of the items from the crocodile to give to the big shots in the capital. In addition, the crocodile kidney had a strong effect of nourishing the kidneys, and the crocodile penis had a strong effect of boosting one's sexual function. Rinpochen was going to keep it for himself to roast the kidneys and make wine. After returning from Earth, Rinpochen strolled around City. In fact, Tooth City wasn't small. After all, it was the largest city outside the 60,000 mountains and could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. However, with the departure of the merchants, the Tooth City became deserted. There were only a few tens of thousands of people in the city. Therefore, it looked a little deserted. However, it was still an eye-opener for Rinpochen after spending 3 days in the city. All kinds of rare herbs, rare beasts, hides, and rare ores could be seen in some of the stalls in the city from time to time. Unfortunately, with the departure of those merchants, only a small number of Aboriginal caravans were collecting the herbs. For example, the Empress's caravan, the people from the clinic, and a shop called San Fantang that was arranged by Rinpochen. Needless to say, the Empress's caravan collected the herbs mainly for the palace and for Rinpochen's training. San Fantang provided various herbs for the rearguard commandery. The name came from the fact that the purchase price was 30% of the market price. In this world where communication was underdeveloped and transportation was difficult, merchants often purchased goods at 10% of the market price or even lower. Even on Earth, most of the time, the purchase price was only 10% or 20% of the market price. Rinpochen was already benefiting the people by using 30% of the market price. As a result, Even though San Fantang had only been established for 2 months, it had a great reputation and was highly praised. In addition to those rare items, Renbachien also saw many strange things in the city. For example, there was a kind of fruit man flower. The flower was a lifelike image of a naked man. It was said that eating this thing was good for boosting one's sexual function. Renbachien was skeptical when he heard this. He then bought a sack and asked someone to load it into the carriage. What's this? After walking for a short distance, Renbachien saw a pot of flowers placed by someone. The 2 blue flowers on the pot looked like 2 mandarin ducks on earth with their necks crossed. Cross-eared flowers. We use them to give our lovers. The man who set up the stall looked up at Renbachien and seemed to recognize him. Are you Her Majesty's husband? You look skinny and weak. You look like him. Renbachien smiled. How much are these flowers? They are for you. It's just a pot of flowers. The man said generously. Renbachien cupped his hands and said, Thank you very much. The man waved his hand and said, Just make Her Majesty happy. When Renbachien returned with the flowers, he saw a few students strolling in the city. When they saw Renbachien carrying the flowers, they immediately came up and asked curiously, Teacher, what is this? I only envy mandarin ducks, not immortals. This is a mandarin duck flower. Renbachien immediately changed the name of the flower. After changing the name, it immediately felt a lot more elegant. What are mandarin ducks and what are immortals? The students asked again. Renbachien wasn't in the mood to explain to them. He waved them away and hurried back to the general's residence. The empress was using the radio to deal with state affairs. Renbachien waited for a while before she finished. When she saw the flowers in Renbachien's hands, she immediately smiled and asked, Did you see something good again? Do you recognize it? Renbachien turned around and put the flowers on the table as if he was presenting a treasure. Cross-eared flowers? The empress smiled again. You actually know. Renbachien was slightly surprised. When I first came here, I also found this flower strange and asked about it. However, I didn't understand some of the things they said at the time, but now I understand a little. The empress pursed her lips with a charming look in her eyes. Renbachien stepped forward, covered her face with both hands, looked at her carefully, and gently bumped her forehead before laughing. Back then, the empress didn't understand what love was. Now she understood. Get ready to set off tomorrow, the empress said again. I want to see the scenery and customs of the mountains. Your Majesty likes this place very much. Renbachien laughed. From the empress's behavior after arriving at Yacity, he felt that her feelings for this place were exceptionally different. At the very least, the empress's actions and words when they entered the city had never been seen in Lan City or the other cities along the way. When I was young, I felt that this was the most interesting place in the whole world. There were so many strange things and new discoveries every day. At that time, I thought that it would be great if I could always live here. The empress recalled. However, the living conditions of the people in the mountains aren't very good. In the eyes of outsiders, the Aboriginals seem very powerful because they have to fight with the beasts for survival and have gradually honed their skills over thousands of years. Even so, their lives in the mountains are still very difficult. At that time, the first emperor rebelled to take revenge, but he also had the intention of fighting for a piece of space for them. Unfortunately, most people were unwilling to abandon the place where they had lived for generations. 70 years had passed, and most people were still living in these mountains. When I came here, I saw how difficult it was for them to survive. Although I was very young at that time, I still remembered a lot of things. When I sat in this position, I wanted to make their lives better, but I couldn't do much after so many years. I have always felt a little guilty. The empress recalled as she spoke slowly. This was something that the empress rarely shared with anyone. There were many things that she kept in her heart and had been working hard to do them. However, due to the limitations of the era, there were many things that she couldn't do even if she wanted to. Chapter 736. The next day, they left the empress's carriage and all the carriages in Yacity and set off again. The 4-corned cows were also left behind in Yacity. Other than the empress, who was riding the Kirin Qi Shui, everyone else was riding jumping goats. Many of the goats had large leather bags hanging on their sides. In fact, these were the stomachs of strange beasts. They were extremely tough, could be enlarged, and could only fit a few people. When shrunk, they were only the size of a fist. Renbachien had seen them in Lan City before, but there were very few of them. These stomachs had always been very popular with caravans, but now that the merchants had all returned to their respective countries, they had accumulated more than 300 stomachs in Lan City over the past year. Now, Renbachien had bought all of them and equipped them for the winged cavalry to carry their supplies. It took them half a day to get from Yi City to the entrance of the 60,000 mountains. The more than 100 mountain peaks that looked like pillars supporting the sky finally revealed their complete appearance. The mountain peaks stood there, and there was almost no angle from top to bottom. It was as if they had been inserted there by someone. Trees and vegetation grew from the cracks in the rocks from bottom to top. Birds flew around the peaks, and the cries of apes could be heard from time to time. The overlapping mountain ranges that he saw in the distance were all behind the mountain peaks. These peaks formed a fan shape and stood outside the 60,000 mountains like a barrier. Renbachien had asked in the city before and found out that there were a total of 108 peaks, which were called the forest pillar screens. This number was very interesting to Renbachien. 108 represented a lot of things in China. In Chinese culture, 108 represented perfection. Many buildings had the number 108 on them. For example, the lowest level of the Temple of Heaven had 108 stone railings, and the Qinian Palace had 108 stone railings on each level. In Buddhism, 108 represented 108 types of afflictions and were called the 100 defilements. In Taoism, this number also represented the heavenly spirits and earthly fiends. The most famous one was the 108 heroes in Water Margin, which were the heavenly spirits and earthly fiends. There were exactly 108 forest pillar screens here. This made it hard for Renbachien not to suspect that these forest pillar screens were man-made. Otherwise, why were there 108 of them? Not 107 or 118. But how could these 108 towering mountains in the sky be created by a human? If there was anyone who could create it, it would be the gods in the heavens. If this was a creation of nature, then it could only be said that it was truly the work of the gods, and it would make people gasp in admiration. Moreover, there was another strange thing about the forest pillar screen. This forest pillar screen occupied a large area, tens of thousands of acres. It was covered with dense forests, birds and beasts, and it was close to the outside world. Logically speaking, it was a good place to build a village. Unfortunately, there was not a single stockade in this forest of forest pillars. It was said that there was once a stronghold that moved to this place, but within 2 or 3 years, it had fallen into ruin. There were all kinds of reasons, including natural and man-made disasters. In the end, the people in the stronghold either died or fled. After a long time, no one dared to build a stronghold here. This bizarre number and this bizarre rumor made Renbachien feel a certain amount of reverence and curiosity toward this forest of pillar screens. Within the range of the forest pillar screen, it was all dense jungle. There were trees that were more than 10 meters tall and shrubbery all over the field of vision. It was almost impossible to see beyond 5 meters. There were only extremely narrow paths in the forest. The vegetation here grew extremely fast. After a path was cut, it would be covered with new vegetation in a few days. Only after a long period of time did a path gradually form in places where people passed by. It seemed that the plants also knew how to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. If the branches and leaves in one direction were always broken, then after a long time, that side would not grow again. The group rested outside the forest. From time to time, Renbachien wanted to touch Qi Shui's belly. This wretched action made Qi Shui feel disgusted and immediately lay on the ground when it saw him. Well, I can't touch it like this. It had to be said that Qi Shui had a good temper. If it were a cat, it would have scratched him. After resting, the group plunged into this forest and soon approached a mountain peak. Renbachien specially greeted the empress and jumped onto a tree branch, wanting to cross over to take a look at the mountain. Then, a snake that had its tail stepped on gave him a bite. At that time, Rinpoche cursed as if he had ket a dog. After throwing the snake down the tree, Rinpoche looked behind him for help and asked, "I was bitten by a snake. What should I do?" "Sir Ren, this is a king snake. It's not venomous." The winged cavalry warrior who followed behind him laughed. "The name sounds pretty powerful." Rinpoche smacked his lips and was relieved to hear that it wasn't venomous. "This snake likes to eat other snakes, no matter how venomous they are. It feeds on snakes, so it's called a king snake." One of the winged cavalry warriors laughed. "Sir Ren, are you going to see the mountain? I'll clear the way for you." Another winged cavalry warrior took out his steel saber and jumped toward the tree trunk in front. A saber light flashed in midair, and half of the branch immediately fell. The branch was still twisting in the air. "That's a deadwood snake. It's very venomous. If you get bitten, you have to find fern bud grass nearby to detoxify it. Otherwise, the bite will swell like a water tank," another winged cavalry warrior said. Rinpoche nodded. It seemed that there were many kinds of venomous snakes in this forest, and he had better follow the winged cavalry. Following the route of the winged cavalry warriors, they arrived in front of a mountain after half an hour. Rinpoche then carefully sized it up. This mountain was mainly made of a kind of gray rock. Its surface was rugged and had very small angles. However, from a distance, it looked like a pillar that pierced the sky. The most interesting thing was that there was a platform at the bottom of this mountain that was made of the same material as the mountain. It was roughly oval in shape, and there were all kinds of miscellaneous trees growing on it. This forest pillar barrier is also called the forest sword barrier because of this. The circle of rocks below is like the handguard of a sword, and every mountain peak has one, the winged cavalry warrior explained to Rinpoche. "The Aboriginals don't use swords, right? Where did this name come from?" Rinpoche asked. The winged cavalry warrior's explanation made him feel that this mountain peak was more and more interesting. "They don't use swords. This name is said to have been passed down from a long time ago. In the past, there were many foreigners who entered the 60,000 mountains to look for herbs. It might have been left behind by people from that time," the winged cavalry warrior guessed. "No one comes in anymore?" "Yes, but those who are found have turned into corpses. Back then, it was because he had let them go that the salt mountain in the mountains was poisoned. Now, every village will send experts to kill any outsiders they encounter," the winged cavalry warrior said with a face full of resentment. It was said that before the uprising of the late emperor, the emperor of the Han nation ordered people to poison the salt mountain in the mountains. Many people from the various villages were poisoned to death, and most of the villages died because of this. In the end, the Aboriginals overturned the Han nation in a rage. This was considered a classic example of reaping what one had sown. Rinpoche waved his hand, and a golden spear appeared in his hand. He held it with one hand and flicked it toward the mountain peak. He wanted to see if there were any secrets on this mountain peak. "Sir Ren, you can't touch this mountain peak." The other two winged cavalry warriors were shocked by Rinpoche's action and hurriedly tried to stop him. "Sir, if you touch the rocks on this mountain peak, you will meet with misfortune," one of the winged cavalry warriors quickly said. "What about God? It's very powerful." In the past, there were people who smashed rocks and died not long after. They even implicated the entire village. In less than half a month, hundreds of people died, causing panic. Later, someone found the rock that was brought back and brought it back. The rest of the people were safe and sound, the winged cavalry warrior quickly said, sweating profusely. Looking at his expression, it was obvious that he was shocked. Although these Aboriginals were rough, they were still very respectful of certain things. In particular, they had lived here for generations in the 60,000 mountains and knew that there were many things in the mountains that couldn't be touched. Rinpoche was also shocked by his reaction. If this was the case, then he really couldn't touch it. There were still many strange things in this world. For example, the beachy. For example, this mountain peak in front of him. He immediately put away his spear, cupped his hands toward the mountain peak, and said, "I'm new here and ignorant. Please forgive me if I offended you." After cupping his hands, Rinpoche felt a gust of wind above his head and quickly took a step back. A rock that was half the size of a person fell from the mountain peak, smashed on the ground, and rolled twice. It's over. This mountain peak is angry. The faces of the two-winged cavalry warriors turned pale. It seemed like this mountain peak had a very important place in their hearts. With an innocent look on his face, Rinpoche said, "It was the one who attacked first. It has nothing to do with me, right?" "It's better to go back and tell Her Majesty," the two-winged cavalry warriors said. Rinpoche felt perturbed when he saw the two of them like this. He stopped looking at the mountain peak and followed them back to see the Empress. However, the three of them didn't see that somewhere on the mountain peak, a red fox with fleshy wings was clutching its heart. It had only crawled for a bit, but the stone suddenly fell down, giving it a fright. The three of them went back and explained the situation. The Empress immediately frowned, thought for a while, and said, "Since you didn't bring that rock back, it should be fine. For safety's sake, I'll go with you to take a look. Men, go and hunt some prey as a blood sacrifice." A moment later, the group brought a flower eagle, a black gentleman, and an ape to the mountain peak. The Empress ordered someone to place the prey on the mountain peak, asked the winged cavalry warriors about it, and said some sincere words to the mountain peak. She only left after seeing that nothing else happened. After this incident, Rinpoche gave up on the idea of sightseeing and followed the Empress step by step. Fortunately, nothing much happened the following day, and everyone's hearts were finally at ease. Because of the Bichi, there were many twists and turns along the way. Broken axles weren't a problem, but all kinds of natural disasters and beasts happened from time to time. Fortunately, everyone was very strong, and nothing serious happened along the way. However, there were a few winged cavalry warriors who were injured and recuperating. At this time, everyone finally arrived at the first resting point, Ping Village on Mount Pingyang. At this time, the Bichi was arching its body and gritting its teeth at a golden feathered eagle that was circling in the sky. For the past 2 days, whenever it reached a high altitude, this golden feathered eagle would appear, causing it to be annoyed and itch to immediately bite and eat that fellow in the sky. However, even though it had wings, it couldn't fly. Over the past 2 days, it had been harassed by this golden feathered eagle many times. Chapter 737. The Bichi arched its body and stared at the golden feathered eagle in the sky. However, the golden feathered eagle only circled in the air and let out a clear cry from time to time. The golden feathered eagle wasn't considered a superior predator in the 60,000 mountains. This eagle had a wingspan of 7 to 8 meters, and its iron claws could tear apart a black-haired man of the same level. To ordinary aboriginals, the golden feathered eagle was a very dangerous existence. However, there were too many ferocious beasts in the 60,000 mountains, and there were many predators in the sky that were more powerful than the golden feathered eagle. Furthermore, the golden feathered eagle had an extremely delicate smell. This made the golden feathered eagle the prey of other beasts if it wasn't careful. Therefore, the golden feathered eagle was usually very cautious and mostly hunted weak prey like baby asps in the open space of the forest. This time, however, it was different. It had its eyes on the Bichi and refused to leave even though it knew that the little fellow below was not easy to deal with. After a while, the Bichi rolled its eyes and suddenly leaped toward other trees without looking back. It jumped high and low from tree to tree, exposing its back to the golden feathered eagle's field of vision from time to time. The golden feathered eagle in the sky couldn't bear it anymore and swooped down. The golden feathered eagle could reach 600 kilometers per hour when hunting, but this speed was still too slow in the Bichi's eyes. This was especially true in front of the golden feathered eagle, which played with speed. Just as the golden feathered eagle was about to pounce on it, the Bichi suddenly disappeared from the tree branch. The golden feathered eagle's huge body and claws broke the fist-thick tree branch and crashed into the dense forest below. The Bichi turned into a red line and scurried to another tree before turning back and grabbing at the golden feathered eagle's neck from the side. In an instant, the golden feathered eagle's neck was torn in half. Fresh blood sprayed out and emitted an alluring bloody smell in the forest. The golden-feathered eagle wanted to use its iron hook to tear the beachy apart before it died, but it missed. The golden-feathered eagle struggled in midair as it smashed a few tree branches and fell. By the time it landed on the ground, it was already half dead. The beachy jumped onto the golden-feathered eagle's back and shook its tail gently. Its small eyes were full of pride. However, it didn't feel proud for long before its eyes widened and its short fur stood on end. Just a few dozen meters away from him, a jet-black fellow was looking at him with a pair of cold and cruel eyes. It was a 4-meter-tall bird. The black fish all over its body emitted a metallic glow. His eyes were filled with ridicule. The beachy was startled by the fact that there was a dire beast here that it hadn't discovered before. However, it was only a slight shock. The beachy jumped down from the body of the golden-feathered eagle. It first took a few tentative steps towards the ferocious beast. Then it hopped to one side, then to the other side. Its small eyes looked at the black beast for a while, then looked around. The strange black bird just looked at the bouncing beachy with a mocking gaze. It didn't move at all. The beachy seemed to be a little bored. It jumped 10 meters away from the strange bird and raised its head to look at it. It seemed to find this uncomfortable, so it jumped onto a branch and looked down at the strange bird. Only then was it satisfied. Woof! The beachy barked. His voice carried a hint of provocation. Then the black bird moved. Like a bolt of black lightning. It crashed directly into the tree beneath the beachy. Boom! More than half of the tree was sent flying. Even though the beachy jumped away in time, it was still shocked by the speed of the black bird. Fast. Very fast. This was the first time it realized that there was such a fast creature besides itself. The black bird rushed to the tree where the beachy was resting. With a flap of its wings, it cut the tree in half like a steel knife. Just like that, the two beasts started fighting in the forest. The beachy fled while the black bird chased. Like a bulldozer, it cleared a path in the forest. One by one, the towering trees fell with a loud crash. Very soon, the beachy felt like cursing. How could this fellow be so fast? Didn't it feel tired? No matter how fast it ran or how hard it tried to hide, it couldn't shake it off. It was like maggots on a bone. Wherever it went, that fellow followed. It didn't even have a chance to breathe. Ping Village on Mount Pingliang. When the Empress and her party arrived, the entire village naturally came out to welcome them. Everyone in the village came out to welcome the Empress. However, what caught the Empress's attention was that many of them were injured. Renbachian looked around and saw about 500 to 600 people. The men were wearing animal skin shorts, the women were wearing shorts and tube tops, and only a few elders were wearing cloth clothes. However, many of them were injured. There were at least 20 people with different injuries on their bodies. There were both men and women among them, but without exception, all of them were at the Kismet Heaven level, which was equivalent to the Earthwheel level. As for the other four-way heaven villagers, they were fine. Shangping Village welcomes Your Majesty's arrival. This is the first time Your Majesty has returned in more than 10 years. Please don't blame us for coming late. A few elders in cloth clothes came forward and said to the Empress. Even though they looked calm, one could see the worry between their eyebrows. What's going on? The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked. Shangping Village wasn't considered a big village, but because it was close to the forest pillar screen and Yi City, it had always been a place that the Aboriginals had to pass through. As a result, its situation had always been pretty good. Many of the weaker villagers simply gave up the tradition of hunting for a living and became middlemen instead. They were the kind of guides who brought Aboriginals out of the mountains to Yi City to sell herbs and ores, as well as to buy salt and iron for a small fee. Furthermore, this was the periphery of Shangping Village. There weren't any ferocious beasts around it, so it had always been very peaceful. However, it seemed like there was a problem now, especially with the injured Kismet Heaven martial artists in the stronghold. If he remembered correctly, the Shangping stronghold rarely fought with others. They had also recruited people from other strongholds, so there were at least 60 to 70 Kismet Heaven martial artists in the stronghold. Now, only 20 of them had come out. Where were the rest? Your Majesty, you must be tired. Please enter the village and rest. The elders didn't answer and instead invited the Empress into the village. Shangping village wasn't a big village, but there were many stone houses in it. Many of them were empty and could be used by the aboriginals to rest. Furthermore, they didn't charge any fees. It was precisely because of the important location of Shangping village and this method that it had a good reputation among the other villages. The moment Rinpoche entered the village, he smelled the lingering smell of blood. He looked in the direction of the smell and saw 7 or 8 corpses placed at the side with straw mats covering them. "What the hell is going on?" "I want to hear it," the Empress asked. The elders hesitated for a while before replying, "We didn't want to disturb your majesty. A few months ago, a crow general appeared out of nowhere and settled down nearby. It was extremely powerful, and the people in the village wanted to drive it away at first. However, many of them were injured instead. Nowadays, the people in the village are often attacked by it when they go hunting. If this continues, I'm afraid we won't be able to stay in Shangping village." The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked, "A Cardinal Heaven Crow General?" "It must be a Cardinal Heaven expert. Over the past few days, 31 Kismet Heaven experts have been killed or injured by it." The elders nodded. Rinpoche looked at the Empress thoughtfully and asked, "Your Majesty, there aren't many crow generals with such strength, right?" "I've rarely heard of them." Gong Zheng, the commander of the winged cavalry, replied. Rinpoche nodded. Last year, he had seen a crow general with this kind of strength in Tianjing Basin. It was one of the 3 most powerful strange beasts in the 6 doors. During the final battle, all the other people and strange beasts were killed, but that crow general escaped. This one couldn't be that one, right? After all, such a powerful beast had its own territory and wouldn't easily move to an unfamiliar place. In particular, this was the periphery of the 60,000 mountains, where such a powerful beast shouldn't appear. In particular, it was a rare beast like the crow general. If it was the one in Tianjing Basin, it would make sense. Rinpoche didn't know how it came here from Tianjing Basin. Soon he became excited again. He was envious of that crow general. Not only was it powerful, but it also had extraordinary strength and a body like steel. Most importantly, it could be ridden. Back then he saw that crow general run away with Tai Tu Mongshan and that monkey on its back. If the Empress could subdue this crow general, it would be a good thing. Although it wasn't as awe-inspiring as Chishui the Kirin, it was still a top-notch mount. Most importantly, they had obtained records of this crow general from the 6 doors when they were clearing them out. Chapter 738. Rinpoche thought that the Empress would immediately send people to search for traces of the crow general. However, she didn't. Instead, the winged cavalry warriors were scattered outside while the Empress and Rinpoche rested in the largest house in the village. The environment was simple and crude, but there wasn't much to dislike in this place. Even though the Empress wouldn't mistreat herself, she wouldn't be picky about the kindness of her people. They rested for a night. The next day, the Empress brought Rinpoche, Gong Zheng, and a few elders to the back of the village, where piles of stones were densely placed. Rinpoche immediately guessed what they were when he saw their shapes. These were the graves of this village. There were only a few hundred people in the village, but there were at least thousands of these stones. Some of the stones were larger and were scattered among them, making up about 1/10 of the total. Most of the stones were stacked together with a dozen fist-sized stones. First, someone brought a wooden basin of water over. Following which, the Empress stood in front of the graves and said in a deep voice, "I'm the monarch of Dayo and the ruler of the Aboriginals. Today, I'm here to ask if the souls of the ancestors are willing to protect Dayo?" There wasn't much etiquette. The Empress simply stood there and asked a simple question. With these words, a gust of wind blew through the air. The elder in the village put a thin branch into the basin, and it immediately stood firmly in the water as if it had taken root. The Empress cupped her fists and said, "Thank you very much. As long as I'm on the throne, I will naturally seek a better life for my people. Everyone, please protect Dayo and the Aboriginals." Gong Zheng and the other elders also cupped their fists. Upon seeing their actions, Rinpoche imitated them and cupped his fists. Everyone turned around and returned. There were no offerings, no livestock, nothing at all. It was just a simple question, a simple tree branch, and a simple answer. After returning to the village, Rinpoche asked, "Your Majesty, what happened just now? I didn't come before, but now that I'm here, I have to greet you." The Empress said casually, "Are the souls of the ancestors really still there?" Rinpoche asked softly. The Empress looked at him strangely and asked, "Why do you ask? Didn't they answer?" "I just find it a little unbelievable." When Rinpoche recalled the scene where the tree branch stood motionlessly in the water, he still felt that it was somewhat unbelievable. Although he had heard many people mention that the souls of the soldiers who died in battle would follow their heads back to the 60,000 mountains and turn into heroic spirits to protect the aboriginals, and he knew that there were many strange things about this world, he was still surprised to see such a scene. Do we need to offer some sacrifices to those heroic souls? Rinpoche asked again. Of course. Gong Zheng and the elders in the village will send the blood food in a while. The Empress nodded. I feel that it's a little weird. Most people offer sacrifices first before asking for blessings, but it's different when it comes to Her Majesty. The other party agrees first before you give them blood food. Rinpoche felt like laughing. If they don't agree, will Her Majesty demolish their homes? How could that be? I am not a muddle-headed person who brings disaster to the country. How could they not agree? Isn't it natural for ancestors to protect their descendants? The Empress felt that Rinpoche's way of thinking was rather strange. As for the blood sacrifice that will be sent later, I will be there personally to offer sacrifices. They won't be able to afford it. The Empress said. Isn't it natural for descendants to offer sacrifices to their ancestors? Why wouldn't they be able to afford it? Rinpoche returned the Empress's words. This is what the late Emperor said. He naturally has his reasons for saying this. The Empress immediately shut Rinpoche up. The late Emperor that the Empress was talking about was naturally the first Emperor of Dayo and not her father. Rinpoche turned his head to look at the back of the mountain and suddenly wondered if the Empress would also be staying in this mountain a few hundred years later. What about himself? This was a question that was worth investigating. At the thought of this, Rinpoche asked the Empress. The Empress immediately stopped in her tracks with an unhappy look on her face. After thinking about it, she seriously said, "You and I are married, so you are an aboriginal. If any of them don't agree, I will beat them up until they agree." There was nothing that couldn't be solved with a beating. If there was, then he would beat them up again. When the two of them returned to the village, someone went to Gong Zheng and whispered a few words to him. Then, Gong Zheng came to report to the Empress. Rinpoche then realized that even though the Empress didn't say anything, the winged cavalry was already investigating the news of the Crow General. The results were sent back very quickly. Dozens of kilometers away, there was a large area of destroyed trees. The Crow General seemed to have gone crazy and was wantonly destroying the forest and drawing a circle. Some people also guessed that it was chasing something. However, the Crow General was known for its speed, and there weren't many things in this world that a Cardinal Heaven Crow General couldn't catch up to. After knowing the general's location, the Empress personally led the team to capture the Crow General. However, her thoughts were different from Rinpoche's. Rinpoche felt that the Crow General was easy to ride, and the Empress had long heard that it tasted good, especially its wings, which were the most tender and delicious. It was a pity that there were very few Crow Generals, and they had never been heard of in the vicinity of Lon City. Furthermore, this was a Cardinal Heaven Crow General. It had escaped the last time, so she couldn't let it escape again. The Beachy finally understood what it meant to feel like. It was feeling like this now. Initially, it saw how big that fellow was and felt that it was very strong, but it still relied on its speed to jump around in front of it. As a result, it had been chased by that fellow for an entire day and was so tired that its tongue was hanging out. However, that fellow still didn't give up and seemed as if it wouldn't give up until it caught it. Now, with every lap it ran, the forest that was destroyed by that big fellow expanded. If that fellow wasn't nearby, it would have already run into the depths of the forest. Now, it was hesitating whether it should run into the forest first and find an opportunity to turn back. Just as it was trying to figure out what to do, it realized that it had been blocked in front of it. However, it was overjoyed and rushed toward the red figure in the middle of the crowd. Then, it scratched the face of the bastard beside her a few times before jumping into the crowd. The crow general didn't stop when it saw the people in front of it. Its eyes were bloodshot as it rushed toward the Empress in red. Red was a taboo for the crow general. It would get excited at the sight of this color. It was as if it were on steroids. Its mind was filled with the thought of tearing that fellow into pieces. However, halfway through, it recognized the woman in red. After all, the intelligence of a cardinal heaven-level beast wasn't much lower than that of a human. Even a dog had the intelligence of an 8-year-old child, let alone a cardinal heaven-level beast. Back then, the entire 6 doors was destroyed by a group of people led by the woman in red. The Iron-Head Mang Mountain and the Scarlet Monkey, which were about as strong as it, were killed in that battle. It was the only one who escaped. How could it not remember? Run! The group watched as the 4-meter-tall crow general charged at them with bloodshot eyes, as if it had taken drugs. They thought it had recognized them and wanted to take revenge, but it suddenly braked and turned around to flee. Everyone immediately knew that this was the same one that appeared in Tianjing Basin last year. In fact, based on its size, everyone was almost certain. However, just as it turned its head, a figure swept past its neck. A 2-inch-long sharp fingernail shot out from a finger and scratched the feathers on its neck. It was like metal colliding with metal, accompanied by an ear-piercing friction sound, and actually burst into sparks. Lin Xiaola. She swept past the crow general like the wind and looked at her fingernails with a pained expression on her face. This fellow was too tough. She attacked again, and every move she made was aimed at the crow general's unusually large eyes. The crow general was anxious to escape and fought desperately. It flapped its iron wings toward Lin Xiaola, causing a gust of wind to blow away the weeds on the ground. It then jumped up and clawed at Lin Xiaola with its iron claws. Even if she was made of iron, it would still leave a hole in her. Where do you think you're going now? The Empress sneered. She took a step forward, and an imposing aura emanated from her body that pressed down on the crow general like a mountain. She took another step forward and was already behind the crow general. She slapped the crow general with her palm. The crow general turned its body and collided with the Empress's iron wings. Even Rinpochen and the others in the distance could feel the airflow from the collision, let alone in the middle of the arena. The ground rolled up like a lake with a stone thrown into it. The Empress's upper body swayed, but the crow general staggered. The crow general's iron feathers were comparable to steel. It was extremely fast and powerful, and it had almost no natural enemies. Moreover, it was a cardinal heaven-level beast. However, it was still at a disadvantage when facing the Empress, who hadn't used her full strength. Purple patterns began to appear on the Empress's face, and her aura rose steadily. It was as if Rinpochen saw a mountain climbing higher and higher. My Extraterrestrial Ruins, a book by a crossdresser. Chapter 739. What did it feel like to have a mountain fall on you? It covered the sky. It was a landslide. Even though the Empress's punch wasn't that powerful, it made people feel as if a mountain had fallen on them. The Empress's fist was like a mountain. All the spectators felt the same way, let alone the crow general in the middle of the field. Boom! The 4-meter-tall crow general disappeared in an instant. A huge pit with a radius of nearly 100 meters appeared on the ground. The deepest part of the pit was 20 to 30 meters deep. The crow general was smashed to the bottom of the pit by the Empress's punch, and it spat out mouthfuls of blood. Even though the crow general had iron feathers and steel bones, it couldn't withstand the Empress's punch, and many of its bones were broken. Catch it! The Empress said faintly as she stood at the edge of the pit with her hands behind her back. The purple veins on the surface of her skin gradually faded, and her skin returned to its original smooth and jade-like appearance. If Teng Yu were to meet you now, I'm afraid that he wouldn't be able to withstand a single punch from you. Rinpochen said. Even though the Empress was extremely powerful in the past, she wasn't this terrifying. Rinpochen didn't know what she had comprehended last year that allowed her strength to improve so much. The empress didn't look very happy. She turned to look at Rinpoche and said, Teng Yu is the fourth most powerful expert in the world because his spear is unparalleled in the world. Even though I've improved a little, it will still take some effort to defeat him. You have obtained his golden spear and his comprehension. If you cultivate diligently, you might be able to reach his height. The empress had put in a lot of effort for Rinpoche. However, Rinpoche licked his lips and said, It's fine as long as I can advance to the next level. As for fighting, that's not suitable for me. He really wasn't interested in fighting. However, he was still interested in practicing martial arts. At least he could live longer. Your Majesty, what should we do with this crow general? Rinpoche asked again. I heard that its wing root tastes good, the empress said as she stared at the crow general that was being carried over. Even the empress might not be able to eat such a top-notch delicacy. It depended more on luck. Lin Shala squatted at the side and drooled as she stared at the crow general's neck. The half-dead crow general was being carried over. When it heard this, it shivered. It was afraid that it would really be eaten this time. Your Majesty, it's a cardinal heaven-level beast. Isn't it a waste to eat it? Rinpoche asked. If the crow general could nod its head, it would be pecking away like a chick. Unfortunately, the empress's punch had shattered many of its bones. Now, it was on its last breath, and its head drooped weakly to the side. What do you think? The empress could tell what was on Rinpoche's mind. If I can subdue it, I'll have another vicious beast that I can control. Even as a mount. Rinpoche felt that it would be a waste to eat it. If eating the crow general could increase one's strength or extend one's lifespan, he would have already prepared a pot. However, the crow general's meat only contained a little more energy at most and had some other uses. In fact, it was meaningless to someone as powerful as the empress and not very useful to Rinpoche. Just like that giant crocodile. In that case, he might as well try to subdue it. The empress looked a little regretful. Compared to subduing the crow general, she was more interested in tasting it. Was it as delicious as the rumors made it out to be? However, seeing that Rinpoche was interested, she had no choice but to say, Go ahead and ask. If it's willing to surrender, I'll spare its life. Otherwise, I'll kill it. Its wings are quite big, so we can roast one and steam the other. The empress had even thought of how to eat it. The crow general wasn't very courageous to begin with. The only reason it looked so ferocious was because it was powerful. If the empress could spare its life, it would naturally be very willing. Hearing that the empress was studying how to eat its wings scared it half to death. It wanted to surrender, but it couldn't do so and could only helplessly vomit blood. Rinpoche looked at the crow general. This fellow was at the cardinal heaven level, and he might not be able to persuade it to surrender. He still had to use some other methods. After asking someone to carry the crow general back to the village, Rinpoche asked someone to catch some birds. The crow general caused quite a commotion when it was carried back to the village. If the winged cavalry warriors hadn't stopped it, it would have been stoned to death. Finally, it was placed in a corner of the village. Everyone was afraid that it would still have the strength to fight to the death, so they tied it up tightly. After a long time, Rinpoche finally came over while the crow general anxiously looked at him. Why don't you ask me? I'll surrender if you ask me. I've gathered some strength now, so I can still nod my head. However, Rinpoche didn't have any intention of asking it. He first asked the people from the imperial kitchen to bring 2 large birds over and set them on fire in front of the crow general. He first roasted the large birds on the rack, then cleaned the charred feathers on their bodies before preparing the 2 birds. 1 pair of wings was placed on the fire to roast. The other pair was marinated in a basin and would be made into honey bird wings later. One of the necks was made into spicy bird neck and the other into smoked bird neck. Rinpoche asked someone to find some stones to heat over the fire before slicing off the breast meat and frying it. As for the legs, 1 pair was fried and the other pair was stewed with herbs. There were also the heads, livers, hearts, and stomachs. Rinpoche cut these 2 birds into 8 pieces and made 16 dishes. From time to time, he would give pointers to the people from the imperial kitchen on how to prepare the parts. Finally, he didn't even spare the bones of the birds and asked them to make a stone frame for the birds. The Crow General trembled as it watched. It was so anxious that it was trembling. "Why don't you ask me if I surrender or not? Why don't you ask me? Why don't you ask me?" Its eyes were about to spit fire. If it could jump up now, it would definitely fight to the death with Renbachien. Renbachien also paid attention to the Crow General's expression. He couldn't tell anything else, but the anger in its eyes was obvious. He sighed to himself that it wasn't easy to subdue a cardinal heaven-level beast. Before long, the aroma of roasted meat wafted over. Lin Xiaola came out of nowhere and squatted there, drooling as she looked at the roasted wings on the fire. From time to time, she would look at the neck of the Black General as if she was measuring its taste. Renbachien asked someone to give one of the wings to the Empress, threw the other to Lin Xiaola, and went to fry the breast meat. After a busy afternoon, he made more than 10 dishes. Some of them were given to the Empress while the rest were eaten in front of the Crow General. After all, it was a bird, and no matter how powerful it was still a type of bird. It would definitely feel sad to see Renbachien torturing other birds in this way. To put it simply, he was killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. This was the consequence of cooking a feast of bird meat in front of the Crow General if it didn't surrender. Chapter 740. "How is it?" the Empress asked casually when she saw Renbachien enter. However, the result was obvious from his expression. "That fellow is quite unyielding. I roasted the birds in front of it for the whole afternoon, but it ignored me," Renbachien said. However, it made sense when he thought about it. They had killed its original owner and companions, and it was the only one who escaped. Now it was beaten half to death. Even if it was a beast, it still had its pride. What's more, it was a cardinal heaven-level beast. "Otherwise, I'll just kill it." The Empress didn't care. Having one more cardinal heaven expert or one less cardinal heaven expert didn't matter to her. As long as one could stand in the imperial court, no one was weaker than this. She only took a step back when she saw that Renbachien wanted to subdue it. In fact, it would be better if he didn't subdue it since she would be able to eat the best delicacy in the world. "I'll try again tomorrow." Before I left, I told it that if it doesn't surrender tomorrow, it will suffer the same fate as those 2 birds today. I'll pluck its feathers and then cut its body into 8 pieces. Each part will be separately roasted, braised, steamed, and stewed in an iron pot. The Empress couldn't help but glance at him strangely. That was indeed the case, but why did it sound so awkward? The next day, Renbachien sent someone to take the 2 large birds to the vicinity of the Crow General early in the morning. The Crow General stared at him with a murderous look. "Why didn't you ask me if I surrendered? You didn't even ask. How do you know if I'll surrender or not? Don't look at me like that. Heaven is virtuous and all living things are equal. Although you are a beast, you are still a life. That's why I'm temporarily protecting you from Her Majesty. However, I can only protect you for 1 day. If you don't surrender today, I'm afraid that you will suffer the same fate as this unlucky fellow in my hands." Renbachien used the fire to roast the bird's feathers while speaking unconvincing words. In fact, when he saw the look in the Crow General's eyes, he felt that he might have underestimated the situation. This Crow General probably wouldn't be easy to subdue. If it didn't repent, he would kill it for another day and feed it to the Empress. The Empress had been thinking about this bird for a long time. The Crow General lay on the ground, so angry that the sack on its neck bulged. The Crow General's throat had a sack of meat that was used to store food. Normally, it would be hard to tell if it was empty. If it was filled with food, it would be able to bulge out a huge meat sack. However, when the flesh pouch bulged, there was a gap in the feathers that were originally tightly covering it, and there was also an opening on the neck. Now, it was as if the meat sack was filled with air and had completely swelled up. Even the iron feather on his throat couldn't block it, revealing the scarlet skin underneath. "Look, this is the neck. It can be roasted, smoked, or stir-fried. It can even be stewed with a good taste. After all, the neck of a bird is flexible, and the meat on it is tender," Renbachien said unhurriedly as he swiftly chopped off the neck. After dealing with the neck, he dealt with the bird's head, then the bird's body, the bird's wings, and the bird's legs. The crow general couldn't move and could only listen to Renbaqian's words, feeling both angry and cold. I won't end up being dismembered and eaten like this, right? Damn bastard. I want to surrender, but why don't you ask me? Ever since it was seriously injured by that punch yesterday, it had been left here. After a day, its injuries didn't improve and instead worsened. It even wondered if it would die in such a sullen manner. After another morning, Renbaqian made more than a dozen dishes. He sighed when he saw that the crow general was still looking at him with a murderous gaze. He sat cross-legged near the crow general and asked, "I'll ask you again. Are you going to surrender? If you don't, you will be my dish tonight. If you surrender, you will be my mount in the future." When the crow general heard what Renbaqian wanted to hear, it almost shed tears. This was the first time it realized how difficult it was to surrender. That bastard had been cooking in front of it for 2 days and was finally asking it a question. It was afraid that Renbaqian would misunderstand and wanted to nod frantically. However, after a night, the strength that it had accumulated with great difficulty yesterday had gradually dissipated. It could only move its head slightly and nod. "Are you nodding or shaking your head?" Renbaqian was pleasantly surprised when he saw that the huge bird lying on the ground moved its head. It didn't respond for the entire afternoon yesterday, but it was finally willing to move now. "If you surrender, move your head a little," Renbaqian said again. The crow general moved again. This time, Renbaqian was pleasantly surprised. This fellow had been staring at him with a murderous gaze, and he thought that he had no chance. He didn't expect it to surrender all of a sudden. Could this be a trap? Animals wouldn't surrender first and then rebel after their injuries were healed, right? "Are you really surrendering?" Renbaqian asked. The crow general had used up almost all of its strength after moving a few times. It didn't even have the strength to be angry now. After squeezing out the last bit of strength in its body, the crow general finally nodded slightly. "Surrender? It really surrendered. Can you please stop asking? Can't you treat my injuries first?" Renbaqian looked at it for a long time, trying to figure out what it was thinking. Although he couldn't tell what it was planning, he finally realized that its eyes were dim and its breathing was weak. It seemed like it wasn't far from death. He quickly asked someone to treat its injuries so that it wouldn't die. Then he rushed back to see the Empress. In any case, he had subdued the crow general this time. It was a capable general and a good mount. "Your Majesty!" Renbaqian saw the radio in front of the Empress as soon as he entered the room. She seemed to be thinking about something. "Let's talk about it later," the Empress waved her hand and said without turning her head. She tapped her fingers on the table twice before speaking into the radio and asking, "Great Elder, what do you think?" What Lin Mengxing said should be true, but the specific decision still depends on what your Majesty thinks. In my opinion, although the Yun nation is bound to perish, Dayo doesn't have that many officials and can only make an exception to promote people from the bottom. As for the effect, we can only take it one step at a time. According to him, these people will be useful in the future. This time, they surrendered to Dayo and won't rebel easily. Even if they rebel, they won't amount to much. Furthermore, they are warlords of their respective cities, so it's a good choice for them to manage the people of the Yun nation. With these people leading the way, I believe that Protector Z will be able to present the Yun nation's emperor before your Majesty's wedding and add a joyous atmosphere to your Majesty's wedding. Great Elder Shiqing's voice was heard from the radio. The Empress nodded and immediately said, "Z Dong Lai. I'm here." Another cold man's voice was heard. Chapter 741. Although the imperial power of the Yun nation was supreme, the warlords of each city were actually hereditary. Their heirs would take over and consolidate the strength of the family in a region from generation to generation. After hundreds of years, the warlords were more or less like local tyrants. The so-called imperial power was just a title in name. According to the history of China, it was almost a replica of the emperors and the feudal lords. However, the feudal lords were replaced by the warlords here. The warlords were divided into factions, and the relationships were extremely complicated. Even if the emperor of the Yun nation wanted to change, it would be difficult for him to do so. However, the lives of the warlords of the Yun nation, who were originally tyrannical, were extremely difficult. In particular, the corpses of the original owners of most of the cities on the front line of Daeyeo's army were now scattered on some rocky hills. There were also a few who saw that the situation was not good and threw everything away in time to escape with their lives. The current state of the battle had caused everyone to be alarmed. The officials in the remaining cities were also in a state of panic. In particular, two of the warlords who were facing the front line of Daeyeo's army ran away when they saw that the situation was not good. The rest also sent their families and children away. However, the warlords who had lost their cities were no different from drowning dogs. Just as they ran back to Wang capital with a glimmer of hope, Zheng Qingmian found an excuse to behead them. There was a strong army outside, but there was also a prime minister who was eyeing the warlords covetously. Even though Zheng Qingmian finally believed that Daeyeo was preparing to destroy the Yun nation and was prepared to fight to the death with the last of his troops, he still didn't show any mercy to the warlords who had abandoned their cities. They would die if they ran back. However, they would also die if they didn't. Nearly half of the 200 cities had fallen into the hands of Daeyeo. Even the most optimistic people had an extremely mournful attitude toward this war. Not to mention the warlords who were well aware of the military strength of both sides. Now, some of the warlords had begun to drink and indulge in debauchery every day. They were unscrupulously preparing to enjoy their last days. It was as if the cities were covered by dark clouds, and the atmosphere of despair was freely spreading. At this moment, a person appeared. It was Lin Mengxing, a young scholar in his 30s. He had a glib tongue and persuaded many warlords to surrender to Daeyeo. There were a total of 47 cities between Wang capital and Daeyeo's frontline. It could be said that once these 47 cities were opened, there would be no more barriers in Wang capital except for the 3 defense cities. Given the current situation and the military strength of Daeyeo and the Yun nation, surrendering seemed to be a wise choice, but it wasn't. Many people had such thoughts but didn't implement them in the end. First, the Aboriginals had a bad reputation in the Yun nation. Secondly, surrendering to the non-humankind would be a stain that would go down in history. Their descendants wouldn't be able to raise their heads in the future. Secondly, there were people who wanted to surrender at the front lines, but at that time, when the enemy was at the city gates, how could Zidonglai accept it? Fourth, they still had to consider, even if they were to Daeyeo. Now that there was a war, no one knew where those people had hidden themselves. But if they surrendered, they would have to bear the infamy of being cursed. Who knew when those experts would appear from somewhere and kill everyone in the city lord's mansion? They could even spread their chivalrous reputation among the people. As a result, the idea of surrendering was only in the minds of some people. However, Lin Mengxing somehow obtained some information about the current situation of Daeyeo's prisoner camps and used it to infer the changes in the Aboriginals. He convinced dozens of warlords and personally went to the front line to seek an audience with Zidonglai. After listening to the Empress, Rinpochian asked, "What's his purpose?" Hearing Rinpochian's question, the Empress's expression immediately became strange. "I heard that his teacher and a few of his fellow disciples were assassinated by Zheng Qingmian on their way to the capital." Rinpochian was speechless. If he remembered correctly, that was done by the people from the rearguard commandery. If that was the case, then the people from the rearguard commandery had really made a great contribution. Regardless of whether this person was telling the truth, it was fine as long as these people surrendered. So what if this person wanted to use this contribution as a way to advance? Daeyeo indeed lacked such talents. The Empress had similar thoughts. "I'm afraid this person has other plans, and I don't like such people." Rinpochian felt that the Empress's preferences were normal. No matter who it was, they didn't like traitors. An official who is loyal but can't bring benefits to the people, or an official who has his own thoughts but can get things done. Which one do you want to use, Your Majesty? Rinpochian raised this question. In fact, this was a question that the Empress had to face sooner or later. In the past, there were only Aboriginals in the imperial court, and there weren't many other people that could be used. The Empress had never considered this question. The Aboriginals were said to be simple because of their straightforward temperament. On the other hand, Dayo was really poor and didn't have many colorful things to baptize them with. However, people would always change. It was the same for the Aboriginals. As Dayo changed bit by bit, every Aboriginal official had to undergo this baptism test. Not to mention the people from the Yun Nation and the Jing tribe. The Empress would need to use them sooner or later. It wasn't a good thing to have the Aboriginals on top of the other races. Rinpoche simply took this opportunity to raise this question. The Empress pondered upon hearing Rinpoche's question. Of course, I like loyal officials. However, if I can't satisfy both sides, I'll use the second option. Is this what you mean? The Empress said after thinking carefully. Rinpoche applauded and said, "As expected of your Majesty, you understood immediately. You seem to like using these people? It has been like this since the beginning of the Jing tribe." The Empress looked at him. "Your Majesty, although the Aboriginals are loyal, there are many things that they can't do. Furthermore, we don't have too many of these powerless officials. We can't possibly send ordinary people over to be officials, right? That would definitely create a mess. His Majesty had to use these people, whether it's for Dayo or for the people." Rinpoche immediately said. In all fairness, he did like to use people who weren't Aboriginals. The Aboriginals were indeed very powerful. However, this kind of power had nothing to do with construction. It was about destruction. What he wanted to do was construction. Those who weren't strong but were smarter than the people from the Jing tribe and the Yun Nation would be more useful. However, this would inevitably lead to the gradual entry of non-Aboriginals into the imperial court. When facing the powerful Aboriginals, they would definitely band together. Such an outcome would make it easy for others to suspect him because he wasn't an Aboriginal. Furthermore, he was the one who created that situation. This was something that he had long understood. "I understand, and I won't doubt you." The Empress sighed. How could she not understand? It was just that Dayo had always been the Aboriginals' Dayo. This kind of life seemed to be about to change. Rinpoche held the Empress's palm and transferred his warmth to her. Chapter 742. Rinpoche stayed in the stronghold for a day and a half. Other than subduing the Black General, he also spent a day teaching the people in the stronghold how to make ice and smoke. It wasn't because the weather was unbearably hot, but because food was difficult to preserve. It was difficult for the villagers to store food, and if they didn't catch enough prey in a few days, the entire village would starve. This wasn't an isolated case. It wasn't just one or two villages, but the situation in most of the villages in the 60,000 mountains. Relatively speaking, Shangping village was closer to the forest pillar screen and Yacity, so the situation was better. It was said that the situation in the depths of the 60,000 mountains was better because the villages there were strong, and the prey there was also strong. The stronger the prey, the slower the energy dissipation in its body and the longer it could be preserved. Only the weaker villages that were further away from Yacity had it the hardest. Rinpoche simply taught them the method of making ice, told them how to find saltpeter, and told them to dig ice cellars. This way, they could store more game that they hunted and take it out when their harvest was low. The people of Shangping village were shocked when they learned how to make ice and successfully made it. They had heard from people that there was ice in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, but they only treated it as a strange story. They didn't expect to be able to make something that emitted cold air. Then they were ecstatic. With this thing, meat could be stored for a long time. Everyone looked at Rinpoche with a completely different attitude. There was a trace of kindness in their eyes. The thinking of these Aboriginals was very simple. Whoever had the biggest fist would be respected. Whoever could give them a good life would also be respected. Furthermore, Rinpoche's current strength wasn't considered weak. Although he was still far from the Empress, he was considered pretty good compared to the ordinary Aboriginals. He immediately gained a lot of goodwill by teaching them the method of making ice. Compared to the time he had spent in Lon City, a simple method of making ice here was enough to make everyone in the village look at him warmly. The girls in the village also began to throw flirtatious glances at him. Even though it was just a stronghold, The Aboriginal women had strong and healthy bodies. Their skin was as smooth as satin, and their looks were above average, which made him rather happy. Unfortunately, this situation only lasted for a moment before the team set off again. After that, the Empress, Rinpochen, and the rest passed by dozens of villages. Other than Shangping village, where they stayed for a longer period of time, they stayed at the other villages for at most one night or only for a short while. They stayed at the graveyard near the village for a short while, doing the same things and saying the same things as they did at Shangping village. The result was the same. In every village, after the Empress said those words to the graveyard's gravestones, the tree branches stuck into the water as if they were stuck into gravel. After her hands left, they didn't move at all. That was the acknowledgement and answer of the deceased ancestors to the Empress. There were no soul-stirring promises, only tree branches standing in the water. During this time, the Crow General had finally recovered from its injuries. It behaved itself and didn't even try to escape. It was just that when she looked at Rinpochen, she always had a strange expression. It was as if there was a mixture of hatred and other emotions in her eyes. She didn't like him at all. This puzzled Rinpochen. The one who hid it was the Empress, and the one who saved it was Rinpochen. In the end, when it saw the Empress, it behaved itself and didn't like Rinpochen. Could it be that these ferocious beasts only recognized fists? Or did this Crow General have masochistic tendencies and get a kick out of being beaten by the Empress? This made Rinpochen ponder whether this Crow General was a male or a female, and he looked at it strangely. As a result, the Crow General didn't like him at all. However, under the Empress's order, it had no choice but to carry Rinpochen and become his mount. This time, Rinpochen's Alto was replaced by a Maserati. With a Cardinal Heaven mount, Rinpochen was able to enjoy the thrill of causing chaos wherever he went. Although this Crow General wasn't a match for the Empress, it could still be considered a tyrant in the periphery and central regions of the 60,000 mountains. After traveling for 20 days in a row and covering a distance of more than 500 kilometers in a straight line, everyone finally passed through the periphery of the 60,000 mountains. Rinpochen landed behind the Empress and looked up at her from time to time as she sat on Qi Shui. The Empress had been a little quiet these past 2 days. Although she never spoke much, there was something different about her. This was especially true when he teased her. However, the Empress had been acting a little strange these past 2 days, as if she had something on her mind. It was said that one was timid when approaching home. However, Song Jiwen, who said, feeling even more timid when approaching home and not daring to ask who is coming, had escaped from Lingnan and didn't know if his crime had brought disaster to his family, so he naturally felt timid when approaching home. After that, this saying spread for a long time because people who had left home for a long time were afraid that their hometown was gone, and they panicked because they didn't know if their relatives and friends were dead or alive. However, this didn't exist for the Empress at all. Not to mention returning home in glory, the Empress shouldn't feel timid when approaching home. For example, the Empress hadn't said a word this morning. Rinpochen urged his mount forward to ride alongside the Empress. However, no matter how hard he tried to urge the Crow General to ride alongside Qi Shui, it didn't dare to do so no matter what. It wasn't that the Kirin had any power over the Crow General. It was just that the back of the Crow General was a little high. It was nearly 3 meters off the ground and half a meter taller than the Kirin. The Empress had to raise her head to talk to Rinpochen. Then, the Crow General suffered a kick. It was sent flying more than 70 meters away and almost suffered another serious injury. At that time, the Crow General was about to cry. Was it my fault for being tall? Seeing that the cowardly Crow General didn't dare to go forward, Rinpochen jumped onto Qi Shui's back. He sat behind the Empress and held her waist with both hands. He could feel the softness of her waist under the veil. It's hot. The Empress pushed his hands away. It's natural to feel cool when you're calm. Your Majesty, if you can't calm down, you'll naturally feel hot. Rinpochen unyieldingly placed his hands on her waist again. He was already prepared to be elbowed down at any time. However, it was indeed hot. He could feel the heat from the Empress's body even though he was sitting behind her. It would be strange if the two of them weren't feeling hot on such a hot day. On the contrary, Qi Shui's body emitted a slight coolness that made people feel more comfortable. Seeing that the Empress wasn't reacting, Rinpoche asked, "Do you have any thoughts, Your Majesty?" "Mount Yulong is in front, and the family village is above it," the Empress said. The name of the first emperor was Yapeng, and the family village was the ancestor of the royal family. "Your Majesty, you haven't been back for a long time, so you should be smiling more. I see that you're a little depressed. Is it related to the family village?" Rinpoche thought for a moment. It definitely wasn't related to a village, but to the people in the village. "There's someone in the village right now, and I don't know how to face him," the Empress said faintly. Rinpoche's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. Could it be that the Empress had a childhood sweetheart? Logically speaking, it wasn't impossible for the Empress to have been here more than 10 years ago. Fortunately, he was the victor and was about to pluck the most beautiful and precious flower in Dayo. Otherwise, he would really be jealous. Rinpoche relaxed his tone and smiled as he asked, "Who could actually make Your Majesty feel so uneasy?" "My brother." Chapter 743. When Rinpoche heard the Empress say, "My elder brother," he thought to himself, "What the f***ck? I have a brother-in-law? Why didn't he know about this? I've never heard of it before." Speaking of which, the previous emperor actually had an heir? Or son? How did the Empress ascend the throne? Naturally, Rinpoche didn't know that before the Empress brought him to Great Xia, she had left a message for the officials to bring another person back if she couldn't make it back. If he hadn't fainted at that time, he might have been able to make some guesses. But he didn't hear it at that time, and he didn't hear anyone mention it after that, so he didn't think there was such a person. After all, this wasn't a matriarchal society. The Empress, who was a woman, had become the Empress of Dayo. He naturally assumed that the previous emperor only had one son, Qi Zixiao. However, at this moment, the Empress actually mentioned his brother-in-law. Furthermore, he had never heard of it before. It was as if a monkey had jumped out from a crack in a rock, which shocked Rinpoche. "Your Majesty, is he your biological son?" Rinpoche couldn't help but ask after recovering from his shock. Bang! Rinpoche was sent flying more than 10 meters away by the Empress's elbow. He rubbed his chest, got up, jumped onto Qi Shui's back and asked, "Do I have to call you brother-in-law?" Bang! Rinpoche was elbowed again. Rinpoche stubbornly climbed back onto Qi Shui's back. "Your Majesty," the Empress ignored him. "Are you not on good terms with my brother-in-law?" This time, the Empress finally replied, "I was fine when I was young." Just as he was about to listen to what she was going to say, the Empress shut her mouth again. She stared blankly into the distance, lost in thought. No one knew what she was thinking about. Seeing that the Empress didn't say anything, Rinpoche pondered whether he should treat his brother-in-law warmly or coldly. According to the Empress, their relationship was good when they were young, but it seemed like it wasn't good now. If he was too enthusiastic, the Empress might not be happy. However, if Rinpoche was indifferent, the Empress would probably still be unhappy if Rinpoche was indifferent to her brother-in-law. After all, the Empress still had feelings for him. It could be seen from her uneasiness these 2 days. To be able to make someone like the Empress feel uneasy, even if they were related by blood, it still proved something. No matter what he did, it didn't seem to work. This was a suicidal question. During the lunch break, Rinpoche went to the winged cavalry to ask about his brother-in-law in a roundabout way. However, when everyone heard what he wanted to ask, their expressions immediately changed, and they shut their mouths. This piqued Rinpoche's curiosity. What kind of person could actually cause these burly winged cavalry warriors to turn pale at the mention of him? In the end, he finally heard something from his student. The Empress did have an elder brother. He was called Qi Ziding. As for the rest, there were only 2 things. Firstly, it was said that he was an extremely bloodthirsty person. Previously, he was the one overseeing the protectorate of the Northeast. Secondly, he had assassinated the previous emperor. Even his own students didn't know the specifics. They had only heard about it by chance. The results of his inquiries made Rinpochen a little fearful of this brother-in-law whom he had never met before. He didn't seem easy to deal with. I'll just play it by ear. However, these two pieces of information answered his previous doubts. Mount Jade Dragon was also called Mount Kunlun. If one looked at it from above, Mount Jade Dragon looked like a dragon lying on the ground, and the surrounding mountains were like cages for this dragon. The dragon's head faced the outside of the 60,000 mountains as if it wanted to break free at any time. When it was close to evening, everyone finally arrived at the foot of Mount Jade Dragon. However, just as they reached the foot of the mountain, the winged cavalry warriors who were leading the way stopped. There seemed to be a little chaos at the front of the group, and there were noises coming from the front. A moment later, someone came to the Empress and reported, "Your Majesty, there are people blocking the way." The Empress was silent for a while before driving Qi Shui forward. Ren Baqian followed behind on the Crow General and saw the person who made the entire group stop. It was a burly man in a green robe. He had a square face, an unkempt beard, and his hair was simply combed into a bun. He looked very different from ordinary aboriginals. His green robe was very clean, but it had turned white and looked very old. Upon closer inspection, this burly man was actually a little thin, but he had a big frame and gave off a strong feeling. Upon closer inspection, his green robe was a little empty, as if it was a size too big. More importantly, this man didn't have legs, and there was nothing under his robe. He was using 2 crutches to support his body. Even so, this man was just standing there calmly, but he had an indomitable aura that made people not dare to offend him. It was no wonder that the winged cavalry didn't dare to be rude and stopped to report to the Empress. Perhaps it had something to do with this man's identity. Rinpochen guessed that this man was most likely his brother-in-law. The Empress sat on Qi Shui and looked at that man for a while with a complicated expression on her face. She softly said, "Elder brother." While the Empress was looking at him, the burly man was also looking at her. Upon hearing that the Empress was born, he smiled and said, "You have grown up." Elder brother is the language of those northern dogs, and it sounds distant. If you are willing, you can call me elder brother. The Empress opened her mouth, but ultimately couldn't bring herself to call him brother. Qi Ziding's expectant gaze dimmed as time passed. "If you don't want to call me that, then so be it." Qi Ziding sighed. He then looked at Rinpochen and frowned. "Is this the husband you have chosen? Why is it a northern dog? Go back and choose another one. Let's bury him here." Upon hearing this, Rinpochen felt a chill run down his spine. Following which, he became furious and sneered, ready to speak. He had never been the type of person to not retaliate when scolded. He had always believed that it was too late for a gentleman to take revenge, but he had to take revenge from morning to night. The Empress reached out to stop him. The complicated expression on her face was swept away and replaced with a layer of frost. She coldly said, "You don't need to ask about my affairs. I'm here to visit my mother and tell her some things. Finally, on account of our past relationship, I can tell you that he isn't from Great Xia, the Yun Nation, or the Chen Nation. If you touch a single hair on him, I will take your life." Qi Ziding was curious at first. He thought that Rinpochen was from Great Xia or the Yun Nation, but Qi Zixiao actually said that he wasn't. Could it be that there were other countries besides Dayo, Great Xia, the Yun Nation, and the Chen Nation? Then he flew into a rage. Qi Ziding had lost both his legs and his figure was a little thin. However, his anger immediately made people feel depressed, like the gloominess before a storm. Finally, the anger on the burly man's face dissipated. He looked at Rinpochen and then at the Empress before snorting, "You are rather dignified as an Empress. However, you are still far from it. Since you want to go up the mountain, come up. I have already prepared a place for you to stay." After saying that, the burly man slammed his crutches on the ground and flew toward the winged cavalry behind him. He opened his arms like a big bird in the air and landed on the mountain after a few leaps. "When you reach the mountain, stay with me and don't wander around alone," the Empress said to Rinpochen after seeing that the burly man had disappeared. Rinpochen responded and smacked his lips. This brother-in-law was giving him a show of strength the moment they met. Chapter 744. On the way up the mountain, Rinpoche didn't pay attention to his surroundings. He quietly sat behind the empress, put his hands on her waist, and listened to her. After meeting Qi Ziding, the empress finally explained some of the situation. Combined with what Rinpoche knew before, he finally completed the 72 years of Daeyo's history. Back then, Yapring changed the imperial family's surname to Qi in remembrance of the person who single-handedly destroyed the Han nation and then committed suicide. This matter naturally wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface, and there were some other reasons that weren't known to outsiders. Putting this aside, Yapring changed his name to Qi Peng. Previously, the Han nation poisoned the salt underground in the 60,000 mountains, and the Qi family suffered heavy casualties. Yapeng's family only had a 7-year-old child who survived. The child who survived was the empress's father, Qi Yinghao. Qi Yinghao disappeared 9 years ago, and the empress succeeded the throne when she was only 16 years old. At that time, Qi Ziding was 41 years old. However, a year before that, something happened to Qi Ziding. At that time, Qi Ziding was the Protector General of the Northeast and the 5th most powerful expert in the world. He was famous for his ruthlessness and bloodthirstiness. Qi Ziding's reputation in the Yun nation could be said to stop children from crying at night due to his outstanding military exploits. Qi Ziding's prestige among the people of Daeyo wasn't low either. However, both success and failure were due to Xiaohe. It was precisely because of his bloodthirsty nature that he was extremely prominent as a general in charge of guarding a region. However, if he were to become the emperor of a nation, with his temperament, it would not take long for Daeyo to be filled with complaints. In fact, many of the generals and soldiers in the Protectorate of the Northeast were already complaining under the pressure of Qi Ziding. However, Qi Ziding still went his own way and blindly suppressed them. It was under these circumstances that Qi Yinghao chose the empress as the next emperor. What happened next was what Rinpoche heard. Qi Ziding took advantage of Qi Yinghao's birthday celebration to return to the palace and attempted to assassinate the emperor on the night of the banquet. His legs were chopped off on the spot. Qi Yinghao didn't kill him and only drove him back to the 60,000 mountains. The next year, Qi Yinghao disappeared, and the empress succeeded the throne as a woman. The empress spoke to Rinpoche and said faintly, "Actually, my brother treated me well when I was little and would always bring me some interesting things. I think he also has feelings for His Majesty." Rinpoche thought about Qi Ziding's performance just now and whispered behind the empress. His hands moved from the empress's waist to her abdomen, as if he was hugging her. The empress's body stiffened. She sighed softly and did not speak again. It could be seen that even though the empress was resolute when she spoke just now, her inner feelings were still extremely complicated. As a result, she didn't have much of a reaction to Rinpoche's bold move. After all, Qi Ziding was her only relative. However, her identity and the things that Qi Ziding had done made her unable to let go of certain things. It wasn't convenient for Rinpoche to interrupt such a matter. Before the empress and her entourage arrived at the village, they saw thousands of people, young and old, waiting outside the village. The stronghold was located in front of Mount Jade Dragon and had a population of 3,000 to 4,000. It was considered the largest stronghold within a few hundred kilometers. After all, it was the ancestral land of the royal family. Even though it was almost destroyed back then, it had developed again after a few decades. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Everyone cupped their fists and greeted the Water Empress. Even the ignorant children imitated the actions of the adults and looked at the empress curiously. The empress searched the crowd for a while and found some familiar figures. She had seen them when she came here when she was young. Although a long time had passed, she still remembered a lot of things. However, she didn't say much and just looked at those people one by one. Some of the people in the crowd looked excited, even though the empress's gaze only lingered on them for a moment. This proved that the empress still remembered them. The empress raised her head. The complicated expression that she had when she spoke to Rinpoche just now had disappeared without a trace, and she regained her calmness. Rinpoche felt that this might be the empress's habitual expression. When she was young, she used this expression to give people a sense of distance and hide the uneasiness and nervousness in her heart at the same time. Now, this expression had become a habit. The Empress said, "There are so many people here, so let's skip the formalities and enter the village." After everyone entered the village, the winged cavalry fell behind while the Empress rode Qi Shuai at the front. At the innermost part of the village, there were 3 ordinary-looking stone houses with their doors wide open. The Empress got off her mount and walked into the innermost room. There were many odd-looking stones on the table. "Is this the room that your Majesty used to live in?" Renbaqian sized up the room. It was very high and was about 4 meters tall. There was a wooden bed, a table, a few chairs, and a cabinet inside. Other than these, there was nothing else. The room didn't look like it was occupied, but it was very clean. Qi Ziding must have gotten someone to clean it. "I lived here for half a year." The Empress picked up a monkey-shaped stone from the table and played with it. "I saw this in the mountains and found it interesting, so I picked it up. I didn't expect it to still be here after so many years." "Your Majesty actually picked up a heart-shaped stone." Renbaqian picked up a stone and laughed. In Dayo, this kind of heart-shaped stone didn't have the same meaning as it did on Earth. He didn't expect the Empress to have collected one. The Empress had a strange look on her face. She hesitated for a while and said embarrassedly, "When I was young, I thought this looked like a butt." Renbaqian almost choked on his saliva. Very quickly, Renbaqian discovered something new. He actually found a pair of small hammers in the corner of the wall. The heads of the hammers were made of animal bones and the handles were made of wood. The hammers were probably only held by a 6 or 7-year-old child. He didn't see this pair of hammers because they were blocked by a chair. "This pair of hammers also belongs to your Majesty? My elder brother uses a pair of hammers. I have admired him since I was young and pestered him to teach me a set of hammer techniques," the Empress said. "Unfortunately, I can't use hammers anymore." A voice came from outside the door. The walking stick made a clattering sound as it hit the ground. Qi Ziding wanted to come in with his walking stick, but was stopped by the winged cavalry. His face immediately darkened and said, "Gong Zheng, you are really bold to even stop me." "Let him in," the Empress said. Since the Empress had spoken, no one stopped him. Gong Zheng cupped his fists at Qi Ziding and retreated to the side. Qi Ziding entered the house with his walking stick and looked at the Empress. "This house has been looked after for so many years. When I heard that you were coming, I got someone to clean it up. You came back just in time. A few days ago, they hunted a flower camel. You won't be able to eat it in the palace, so you can have a feast tonight." The Empress turned to look at him and said, "Thank you, elder brother. I will get someone to call you when the time comes." Qi Ziding looked at Renbaqian and said, "For Xiaoya's sake, you can come as well." After Qi Ziding left, Renbaqian smiled and said, "Xiaoya?" The Empress was a little embarrassed. No one had mentioned this name for many years, and she didn't expect him to hear it now. "It's the meaning of prosperity, right? The previous emperor was rather scholarly," Renbaqian said. The Empress snorted and didn't say that she was actually called Xiaoya because her teeth were small and the gap between her incisors was big. That was why she got this nickname. If Renbaqian knew about this, she didn't know what he would say. "Are you going to see Mother tomorrow?" Renbaqian's words lingered in his mouth before he said those 2 words. After all, he was a good young man of the new era. Although he was used to calling her Your Majesty, he still wasn't used to calling her mother. "Our marriage has been decided, so it's not inappropriate for you to call me mother," the Empress said when she noticed that Renbaqian had a pause in his speech. Renbaqian looked around the house and saw that there was only one bed. He laughed and said, "Previously, Your Majesty said that I can't leave your side when we are in the village. This is the only bed here. Are we going to share the same bed tonight?" Chapter 745. In the evening, there was a bonfire party in the village. However, this party was for the other people in the village. The Empress and Renbaqian were called to a room by Qi Ziding. Before Renbaqian entered the room, he saw someone taking care of the flower camel, or rather, the flower camel. It was a 3-meter-long black scorpion-like creature with a cluster of red and white flowers growing on its back. Renbachien was amazed. After asking, he found out that this flower camel was extremely rare and wasn't very strong. It usually dug a hole in it, and the flowers on its back would give off whims to attract insects and small animals that preyed on them. Sometimes, it would also attract the young of large animals that were playing with butterflies. These small animals were its food. After entering the room, they saw a small table. Qi Ziding was sitting in the innermost seat with his walking stick by his hand. Although he was facing the Empress of Deyo, he didn't seem to have any intention of giving way. He just smiled at the Empress. "I know you don't like noise. Let's eat here. They can eat their food and we can eat ours." As for Renbachien, he simply ignored him. Renbachien originally thought that there would be some trouble during dinner, but he didn't expect Qi Ziding to casually chat with the Empress about her childhood and laugh incessantly at the happy parts. "When you were young, you were most afraid of the dark and loneliness. I didn't expect you to be living alone in such a big and deserted palace for so many years." Qi Ziding laughed heartily. "I got used to it after living here," the Empress said faintly. "And it hasn't been deserted for a long time." These words made Qi Ziding look at Renbachien with a complicated expression. After a while, the processed flower camel was served. The meat was snow-white like crab meat. It tore into shreds and tasted fragrant and delicious when placed in the mouth. Renbachien immediately couldn't control his mouth. Of course, he didn't want to care either. While the other two were talking, he only cared about eating. The wine was fruit wine brewed in the mountains. It was cloudy and poorly made. Fortunately, the fruits in the mountains were sweet, so the wine tasted good. Renbachien saw that the Empress's wine cup was empty from time to time, so he poured a cup for her before pouring another for himself. "Have you found the whereabouts of the late emperor?" the Empress asked after half a round of wine. There were not many records of the late emperor. At that time, the people who knew the truth had also left. Until now, the Empress still didn't know why they suddenly left. Or rather, no one knew, but everyone wanted to know. Although Qi Ziding had gone through so many things and had lost his legs, it was impossible for him to return to the 60,000 mountains without searching for the late emperor. "I searched in that direction for 2 years. I passed through the deepest village and climbed the highest mountain. I found some traces and corpses. Even Cardinal Heaven experts found it difficult to defeat the ferocious beasts we encountered later on. Even I had to be careful. Until I saw those things that weren't human. I had no choice but to retreat. Something that looks like a human but isn't." Renbachien suddenly raised his head. This was the second time he heard this phrase. The first time was from Qingyun's sword. In other words, Qingyun's sword's master had entered the 60,000 mountains and returned with serious injuries. He had left a message for Qingyun's sword to be careful of those things that looked like humans but were not. Back then, these words had caught his attention, so he had always kept them in mind. Qi Ziding's words immediately reminded him. Both of them looked at him in surprise. The Empress asked in a low voice, "What do you know?" "Lin Xiaola." Renbachien answered directly. The Empress understood after hearing this. At the same time, Renbachien was wondering where Lin Xiaola was sleeping now. Qi Ziding grinned, revealing an unfathomable smile. "Lin Xiaola is the little girl that Lin Yuhuan picked up back then, right? No one knows her background, but I've finally figured it out this time." "What is it?" Renbachien and the Empress looked up. "It might be something called a chinchilla." Pfft. Renbachien almost spat. "Chinchilla? The kind that looks like a rabbit and is especially fat?" "It doesn't look like it. Tomorrow, I'll buy a box of chinchillas to keep as pets." Both of them looked at him strangely. Renbachien quickly waved his hand and said, "It's okay. We also have an animal called a chinchilla, but it shouldn't be the same kind." Renbachien thought about it and realized that Librarian Lin's name was Lin Yuhuan, which was a rather free and easy name. She must have been an outstanding person back then. Unfortunately, time was like a butcher's knife, and Librarian Lin was now a somewhat gloomy old woman. The Empress hesitated for a long time and finally asked the question that she had been hiding in her heart. "Is Father trying to find the path that they took back then?" "Don't think too much about it. Don't try to find out where Grandfather went back then," Qi Ziding advised. Renbachien felt a little strange as he watched from the side. Qi Ziding didn't seem to hate Qi Hao. He didn't know why such a thing happened back then. The Empress kept these things in mind and didn't ask any more. Now was indeed not the time to explore this matter. According to her thinking, Renbaqian's lifespan was shorter than hers. Perhaps she would only explore these things after his lifespan was up and she had nothing to worry about. They drank until late into the night, and the three of them only put down their glasses after the noise outside had died down. The Empress's face was a little red from the alcohol. This fruit wine didn't have a high alcohol content, but it was very easy to get to the head. I don't know when I'll be able to drink this wine again. Qi Ziding's face was also a little red as he lamented. Do you want to go back to see me on my wedding day? The Empress stopped talking about the Empress and spoke in a calm voice. Asking Qi Ziding to return to Lan City was a rare invitation. Kuzhai has been thinking about you for so many years. He always felt that you should be sitting in that position. After hearing this, Renbaqian finally understood why Kuzhai and the Empress didn't have a good relationship. Since I'm out, I won't go back. It's just that I still don't understand why he put you in that position back then, Qi Ziding said. The Empress fell silent again. Renbaqian interrupted and said, because you only know how to destroy everything. If you want to bring a better life, you need to build and have a compassionate heart. Qi Ziding was about to get angry when he heard this, but then he fell silent. After a while, he sighed and said, perhaps that's the case. Xiaoye is kind. He looked at Renbaqian with his drunken eyes and said, I let you sit here because of Xiaoye. I don't like you. I don't like you very much. If it were back then, I would have killed thousands of people like you. Renbaqian chuckled and said, I brought crops with greater yields and new seasonings to Dayo. I solved the mining problem at Mount Damo, and the annual production reached more than 1.8 million kilograms. I also improved the methods of smelting steel and forging so that fewer people can make more weapons. I made cement, and we don't need to cut rocks to repair the city walls. I made glass and mirrors. If it weren't for the war, these two things could be exchanged for endless gold and silver in Great Xia and the Yun nation. I've done all this, and I can do more. I also have a group of students who are useless in the eyes of the Aboriginals, but they know a lot of things. They can't fight, but they can build. They improved machinery that can travel more than 500 kilometers a day without the use of animals. As long as the railway is laid, it will only take 3 days to travel from Lan City to the Yun nation. They are also making generators to make Lan City brightly lit at night. They can also make more things. I brought all of these things with me. If you were the Empress, these things wouldn't have happened. That's why you can only destroy and not build. Qi Ziding was surprised to hear this. He didn't expect so many changes in the outside world. He was a little tempted and wanted to go out and take a look. Do you know that the world's most powerful expert, Li Fu, is in Lan City, waiting for me to make him a machine that can fly? You can't beat him. Therefore, being able to build is also a kind of power, and it's even more powerful than destroying, Renbaqian said. Chapter 746. After returning to the stone house, Renbaqian listened to the Empress's breathing on the bed and felt a little restless. Apart from the time when he was injured and the two of them were sleeping in the wilderness, even the hotel suites were separated by a mile and a mile. It was rare for them to be so close. Your Majesty, he called out softly. What's the matter? The Empress's voice came from the bed. I just suddenly thought of it. Ru Xian and Lin Xiaola have been in the palace for a long time, so they don't seem to know much about gender. However, Your Majesty is very polite and guarded against it. Who taught you this? Renbaqian looked puzzled and had a mischievous smile on his face. Isn't it normal? The Empress asked. Renbaqian stroked his chin and said, It's normal, but I feel that. Could it be that Your Majesty has read pornographic novels before? What's a pornographic book? The Empress was stunned and didn't know how to react. Those books that describe men and women. Renbaqian chuckled. Crack! Renbaqian heard the sound of the bedboard cracking, bang. The wooden pillow was thrown directly at Renbaqian by the Empress. It hit the area between Renbaqian's legs and bounced off. Renbaqian broke out in a cold sweat. Calm down, Your Majesty, calm down. I was just asking casually. The Empress immediately sat up from the bed. Her eyes shone brightly in the darkness as she said in an unfriendly tone, "How do you know that Exija and Lin Xiaola don't understand the matters between men and women?" Ren Baqian was shocked and almost bit his tongue. He had wanted to tease her a little, but in the end he had buried a mine for himself. And nuclear landmines. Ren Baqian's brain was working very fast. He felt that his brain was working faster than an i9 processor. No matter how he thought about it, he felt that this matter couldn't be avoided. After all, he had already said it, so he could only avoid the important point and dwell on the trivial. Because the two of them don't really avoid people when they change their clothes. In any case, he couldn't tell anyone about the electric shock. The electric shock was nothing, but Exinja's reaction made him feel exceptionally guilty. "Have you seen it before?" The Empress asked coldly. "When Her Majesty returned to Earth, she threw the two of them to me. I threw them clothes, but they changed on the spot and gave me a fright." Ren Baqian said honestly. "You really can't blame me for this. I was also shocked at the time." What he said was true. If the Empress asked, he could also confirm it. In any case, he didn't do anything. The Empress groaned softly, lay back on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. Ren Baqian turned around, sat up, and looked at the Empress on the bed. He didn't say anything and just looked at her. After a long time, the Empress couldn't take it anymore. She looked at him from the corner of her eyes and asked, "What are you looking at?" "I just want to take a look. I like it." Ren Baqian replied softly. "I can't sleep with you looking at me like that." The Empress didn't know if she was happy or unhappy to be stared at like this. She felt uncomfortable all over, but when she heard those words, she didn't hate it. "Since you can't sleep, let's talk." Ren Baqian's mouth twitched and almost suggested truth or dare. It wasn't easy for him to dispel this suicidal idea. "Haven't you said enough during the day?" The Empress asked. "During the day we talk about the day, and at night we talk about the night. It's not the same." Of course it was different. A man and a woman were alone in a room at night. How could they speak the same words as they did during the day? The Empress felt uncomfortable being stared at by him and asked helplessly, "What do you want to say?" "How many children do you like to have, Your Majesty?" Ren Baqian's words almost made the Empress fly into a rage out of humiliation. "Do you want to grant amnesty to the world during your wedding?" Ren Baqian immediately changed the topic after teasing her. The Aboriginals were very strange. For example, cases of rape on Earth were extremely rare. Logically speaking, such cases should be common in a world with a high level of martial arts. In fact, there were many such cases in Great Xia and the Yun Nation. However, it was extremely rare among the Aboriginals. Just like in the brothels in Lan City, where they indulged in debauchery, it was limited to touching and hugging. It was rare for them to spend the night and do indescribable things. It seemed that the Aboriginals had a much lower desire in this aspect than ordinary people. The fertility rate of the Aboriginals was low. In addition to the difficulty of giving birth due to their strong bodies, this was also a very important factor. Furthermore, there was almost no theft among the Aboriginals. The most common crime of the Aboriginals was to cause serious injury or death in fights. Generally, the punishment for a fight was 3 whips. The barbed tail whips would immediately make things ugly. However, if they caused serious injury or death, they would be sentenced to 6 to 5 years in prison. If they deliberately killed someone, the punishment would range from 10 years to beheading, depending on the severity of the situation. However, such cases were extremely rare. The Aboriginals were ferocious to outsiders, but they generally followed their own set of moral standards to their own people. The Empress felt a little strange after hearing Ren Baqian's words and asked, "Why?" "Because it's a festive occasion. Shouldn't the whole world celebrate together on such a joyous occasion? Won't the victims blame me for being unfair?" The Empress shook her head. Ren Baqian shrugged his shoulders. He was just casually saying it. "Will I be a prince after the wedding?" Ren Baqian asked again with a smile. "Of course, my husband will be a prince," the Empress said as a matter of course. What's the benefit of being a prince? Marrying me is the greatest benefit. A smile appeared on the empress's face. She recalled the time when Rinpoche asked her to marry him. Great Elder Shurqin was furious. He had never seen such a shameless person. Rinpoche laughed. This was indeed the greatest benefit. In addition to this benefit, there is also responsibility. The heavy burden of the Aboriginals is on my shoulders, and it is on your shoulders as well. Liking a person means liking everything about her, including all her strengths, her shortcomings, her responsibilities, and her burdens. This was said by a famous person, Rinpoche said softly. Even I'm moved. What's this person's name? It sounds like he's a responsible person. Rinpoche. The empress wanted to laugh. He was indeed shameless again. It's a little cold in the mountains at night, Rinpoche said with his arms crossed. The empress couldn't be bothered with him. Even if it was really cold, he wouldn't feel anything with his strength. Seeing that the empress was ignoring him, Rinpoche could only lie on the ground and look at the roof with his hands behind his head. He suddenly thought of something and said, "Your Majesty, after the wedding, we still have to hold a wedding on Earth." He originally wanted to hold a thank you banquet, but after thinking about it carefully, if he only held a thank you banquet, his family would ask him where the wedding was held and where his family was. What would he say? What would it look like if he didn't let his family know about the wedding? However, he couldn't possibly say that his family was on another planet. But the empress replied softly. Even though she didn't like this, she let Rinpoche do as he pleased. Even though she was the empress, she was always considerate of Rinpoche. Rinpoche had always felt that this was extremely rare and precious. There should be at least some people from her family at the wedding, right? Rinpoche imagined bringing along dozens of fierce-looking winged cavalry warriors. He reckoned that most people wouldn't dare to enter that place. However, if there wasn't a single person, it would be too unseemly and attract gossip. It wouldn't matter to him, but his parents would most likely grumble about him. Should he let Yongsan pretend to be from her family? This could be studied. Rinpoche thought about the wedding on Earth while listening to the empress's breathing. He lay on the ground and rolled, continued rolling, and rolling again. The empress lay on the bed and listened to Rinpoche's breathing. At the same time, she was thinking about the wedding. No matter what kind of woman she was, the wedding was the most important thing. As a result, Rinpoche kept rolling on the ground. The empress reached out to touch him and remembered that she had thrown the pillow away. There was nothing on the bed except for that wooden pillow. She regretted throwing the pillow away so early. "What are you doing?" The empress couldn't bear it anymore and asked. "I'm tossing and turning restlessly," Rinpoche replied confidently. "I can't sleep thinking about my wedding with your Majesty and growing old together." The anger that the empress had just brewed dissipated again. She continued to lie on the bed and stare blankly at the ceiling. Then, she kept feeling uncomfortable lying down and wanted to turn over. The empress felt that she had been infected by him. Chapter 747. The next morning, Rinpoche went out while yawning. He was about to go to bed, but the empress kept tossing and turning on the bed, causing him to be unable to fall asleep. If it weren't for his strength, he would probably have dark circles under his eyes this morning. He went out while yawning. Qin Yuan and Hong Wan entered the room with a basin while sneaking glances at him. He knew without asking that they were overthinking things. Rinpoche walked a few steps in the village and heard shouts coming from afar. He looked in the direction of the sound and saw hundreds of strong men practicing martial arts in an open space. Their movements were very familiar, the fist of death. Qi Ziding leaned on his walking stick and scolded, "Haven't you had breakfast? All of you are so weak. If you were like this under my command back then, I would have beheaded you long ago." As he scolded, he used his walking stick to pick up a few stones and hit them on their heads. "If you continue to be so weak, I will beat you to death first so that you don't look like an eyesore." Rinpoche felt that Qi Ziding was indirectly scolding them. Even the weakest of them were much better than him. Forget it, he wouldn't lower himself to his level. After watching from afar for a while, he strolled back to have breakfast. Breakfast was a soup of meat and wild vegetables. It had a strong aroma that whetted one's appetite. However, the wild vegetables tasted a little bitter and fragrant. It was somewhat similar to a type of wild vegetable that was eaten in the Northeast in early May every year, thorn-tender shoots. Next time, try making some bird's mayonnaise or frying it with flour. It should taste good, Rinpoche said vaguely as he swallowed the meat soup. Do it if you want. The imperial kitchen doesn't know how to, the empress said while holding a bowl. The empress's manners were much better than his, but she ate faster than him. Her wooden bowl was filled to the brim, and she tilted her head and poured all the soup into it. Her actions were pleasing to the eye. Rinpoche figured out the reason for this. Good looks were good in everything. No matter which world it was, looks were the most important. Just look at Zhuge Liang and Pang Tong. Zhuge Liang was 8 feet tall, had a jade-like face, wore a silk scarf on his head, and wore a crane cloak. He looked like an immortal. Looking at Pang Tong again, he had thick eyebrows and a raised nose, a black face with a short beard, and a strange face. The Crouching Dragon and Phoenix Jr. were comparable in terms of talent, but the treatment they received was completely different. If Pang Tong were to change his appearance to that of Zhuge Liang, even if he was arrogant, others would think that he was only arrogant because he was talented. Sunlight shone in through the window, sprinkling a layer of vibrant sunshine in the room. The stone house was very tall, but it was not big. They could touch the bed just by turning around. It was just right for the two of them. It was much more comfortable than the empty bedroom. After breakfast, there was already someone waiting outside. It was a well-dressed man in his 30s. When he saw the Empress, he was a little perturbed and stammered, "Your Majesty, Commander Qi asked me to bring you up the mountain. He said that Your Majesty hasn't been there for a long time and it's easy for you to get lost." "Commander? Brother, do you still hold a position in the village?" The Empress asked pleasantly. Yesterday afternoon, the two of them had been at loggerheads the moment they met, but after dinner, things had eased up quite a bit. "Commander Qi is the leader of the hunting team," the man said with a simple and honest face. "He can't stay idle." The Empress smiled and the man was stunned. "Let's go." The cemetery of the Qi family wasn't at the back of the village, but on Mount Yulong, where the dragon's head was. Rinpoche didn't know anything about geomancy and didn't know what would happen if the cemetery was placed on the dragon's head. However, after so many years, there was an emperor. It seemed that the geomancy here wasn't bad. Along the way, Rinpoche picked a lot of white flowers and wove them into a wreath. "What are you doing?" The Empress saw that he had wove a bunch of flowers into a wreath and didn't understand. "This is the first time I'm meeting my mother-in-law, so I need some gifts. I don't know what she likes, but I don't think she hates flowers, right?" Rinpoche raised his head and smiled. He wasn't paying attention, and his hand was pricked again. However, his skin was rough now, so he didn't care. When the Empress looked at him, her gaze was gentle. "You are very considerate. I'm a polite person." Rinpoche laughed. After climbing up Mount Yulong, they walked along a small path to the top of the dragon's head. In front of them was an open space. From here, they could overlook the entire front, including the family village, the surrounding terrain, and the overlapping mountain ranges in the distance. The scenery was boundless. At a glance, they couldn't tell how many graves there were. Under each pile of stones was evidence of the existence of a person. Some seemed to be frequented, and the weeds in the vicinity were pulled out cleanly. Some were untended and had long been buried by weeds. One wouldn't be able to see them if they didn't step on them. The Empress's mother's grave was in a corner. Even though she was the Empress, it was only one size bigger than an ordinary grave. The stones were of better quality, and they were all hand-picked white stones. The surroundings were very clean, and it seemed like it was cleaned frequently. "All of you can leave." The Empress waved at the people behind her and chased them away. Then she said to Rinpoche, "Come with me." "It seems that my mother-in-law likes white," Rinpoche said as he looked at the pile of white stones in the grave. "I haven't seen it before, but they said that my mother likes white." The Empress nodded. In that case, I've chosen the right flowers. Renbachien laughed. The wreath in his hand was made of white flowers. The empress ignored him, stood in front of the grave and said softly, "I've come to see you again. I've grown up." After saying this, the empress paused for a moment before pulling Renbachien to her side and saying, "It's him. In a few months, I'll be getting married to him. He's not from Dayo, Great Xia, the Yun nation, or the Chen nation. I don't think you care about this." "Hello, mother-in-law," Renbachien said respectfully as he placed the wreath on the stones. "He's a little cunning, lazy, afraid of suffering, afraid of being tired, and glib. He has many shortcomings, but I quite like him. With him around, I won't be lonely." Renbachien couldn't help but look at the empress. "Is this how you think of me? I don't know if you feel lonely. However, this is the ancestral grave. With so many people accompanying you, it must be quite lively," the empress said as she looked at the graves around her. "That brother of mine. Forget it, let's not talk about him. You can see him every day. As for me, after being the empress for a few years, I'm actually very bored. Every day, I stay in the palace, deal with those matters, or just stare blankly. This can't be helped. Father is gone, and I don't know where he went. He must be looking for the late emperor. With so many Aboriginal commoners, someone has to take care of them and bear the responsibility. If I have a child after my marriage, I would like to go out and take a look when he grows up. I heard this saying a few days ago and I like it. The world is so big and I want to see it. Mother, do you think we should go and take a look?" The person who said this is an ordinary person. He can put down everything and take a look, but as the empress, I can't do that. The empress had a lot to say. After talking to the grave for a long time, she simply sat on the ground and asked, "Do you drink wine? I heard that you like it, so I brought wine this time." Renbachien immediately went to the winged cavalry and brought a few bottles of wine. He handed one to the empress and opened another bottle in front of the grave. Chapter 748. The empress sat in front of the grave for an entire day from morning to night with wine bottles strewn all over the ground. He even knows how to sing. It's quite nice. The empress threw the wine bottle aside and laughed as she suddenly thought of something. Renbachien looked at the empress and wondered if she had drunk too much. Did she really drink too much? Not only did she drink in front of the grave, but she also wanted to sing? Should she go to the disco? After drinking a box of sorghum liquor, even the empress couldn't help but get drunk. She immediately said modestly, "I only sang pomp and circumstance. Well, it would be even better if there was an eru." The empress immediately stopped talking. After sitting there in a daze for a long time, she said dully, "I have said so much to you, but you didn't even reply to me. It's boring to talk alone, and you talk to yourself like a fool. Forget it, I'm leaving. I'll come back to see you on my way back." After the empress finished speaking, a gust of wind blew, causing the nearby branches and weeds to rustle. "I don't understand what you are saying either. Anyway, I'm leaving, and you don't have to send me off." The empress waved her hand and stood up from the ground, swaying a little. Renbachien put his arm around her waist, and she didn't object, allowing him to do so. "Goodbye, mother-in-law." Renbachien even politely nodded at the grave to bid farewell. After walking for about 100 meters, there were winged cavalry warriors waiting there. However, all of them had bumps on their faces and were beyond recognition. "Did you guys dig out a beehive?" Renbachien asked subconsciously. In the end, this group of people took out 2 beehives reluctantly and said, "Sir Ren, there are 2 beehives from Golden Ring Peak nearby. This honey isn't only fragrant but also has all kinds of miraculous effects. It makes people feel like they are in the clouds and forget about the troubles of time." "So precious?" Renbachien was surprised. Looking at their reluctance, he knew that this was definitely something good. "It's mainly because it's rare. This thing is rare even in the periphery of the 60,000 mountains, and we only encountered 2 here," one of the winged cavalry warriors said. Looking at the bumps on their faces, these bees were pretty impressive to be able to sting a winged cavalry warrior like this. "This is for Her Majesty." Everyone brought over 2 beehives that were half the size of a human. It's not good for me to take your things. How about this, each of you will be rewarded with silver. The Empress was halfway through her sentence. She didn't even know how much money was left in the treasury. Rinpoche immediately replied, everyone will be rewarded with 300 taels of silver. Everyone at the foot of the mountain will get 100 taels. Thank you, Your Majesty. Everyone was overjoyed. One had to know that a winged cavalry warrior's salary was only 15 taels of silver. 300 taels of silver was almost 2 years of their salary. However, in the Yun Nation, an earthwheel expert's annual salary was at least 2,000 to 3,000 taels. The Empress glanced at Rinpoche. Each of the 200 winged cavalry warriors on the mountain would receive 300 taels of silver. Each of the 400 winged cavalry warriors at the foot of the mountain would receive 100 taels of silver. This would be a total of 10,000 taels of silver. The annual expenses of the palace, together with the salaries of the palace guards and palace maids, were only about 60,000 taels of silver. These 10,000 taels of silver made her heart ache. On their way down the mountain, the Empress asked, "How much silver does the imperial treasury have?" Rinpoche knew more about this than the Empress. The Empress almost never asked about it. Including the sale of spices and mirrors, there are 630,000 taels of silver in the imperial treasury. There are also some treasures given by the ministers during the birthday celebration last year, Rinpoche whispered. The Empress blinked her eyes and asked in surprise, "So much?" Previously, there were only tens of thousands of taels of silver in the imperial treasury. She didn't expect there to be more than 600,000 taels of silver, which surprised her. This was equivalent to 10% of the national treasury's annual income. This is part of the purchase of medicinal herbs. Rinpoche continued, "Now that the families of the officials in Lan City are almost out of money, I'm afraid that their income will drop in the second half of the year. However, Your Majesty has always allocated funds from the imperial treasury to purchase weapons in the Yun Nation. Now that the money has been saved, there will naturally be a surplus. At the end of the year, the gold mine will also receive more than 100,000 taels of silver." The Empress nodded and said, "That's true. This is all thanks to you." Knowing that there was so much money in the imperial treasury, the Empress didn't care about the 10,000 taels of silver that Rinpoche had thrown out just now. It was already dark by the time they went down the mountain. The village was pitch black except for a few torches near the gate and a few stone houses in the innermost part of the village. For the villages in the mountains, lighting up was never an easy task. The animal oil that could be used to light the torches was also very precious to them. Chi Ziding had already prepared a meal for them. After eating, Rinpoche and the Empress extinguished the light and lay down in the room. One of them was still on the bed and the other on the floor. Not long after, Rinpoche heard the Empress's breathing stabilize. It seemed like she was fast asleep. She didn't sleep much last night, but it wasn't a big deal for her. However, after speaking in front of the grave for the entire day, the Empress had exhausted a lot of her mental energy. After a day, she was a little tired. Rinpoche was originally very sleepy, but he couldn't fall asleep after lying down. He simply got up from the floor and sat at the table. He supported his chin with one hand and looked at the Empress's silhouette in the dark. Although there was only a little moonlight shining in from outside, with the improvement of his strength, he could see more clearly than ordinary people in the dim light. He could even see the Empress's appearance and the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Sure enough, good-looking people looked good when they slept. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but the Empress was originally a beauty. He wanted to climb into bed, but was afraid of being kicked off. Rinpoche's thoughts ran wild. He wanted to laugh when he thought of the Empress talking about family matters in front of the grave during the day. He felt that the Empress was quite cute when she looked like that. On the bed, the Empress felt uncomfortable being stared at by Rinpoche. In fact, she had already woken up when he got up. However, she wanted to see what he was going to do, so she didn't say anything. In the end, he sat in front of the table and kept looking at her. As he looked at her, he even laughed. She didn't know what he was thinking about. Now that the Empress wanted to open her eyes, it wasn't appropriate, so she simply continued to pretend to be asleep. There was still some sweetness in her heart. After a while, she gradually let go and allowed Rinpochen to look at her as she fell asleep. The next day, Rinpochen went out yawning again. Seeing him like that, the empress felt that he deserved it. Fortunately, there wasn't much to do today. During the day, the empress and Qi Ziding chatted, and Rinpochen found a place to catch up on his sleep. Rinpochen didn't know how long he had slept, but he was slapped awake by someone. At that time, Rinpochen was sleeping when someone slapped his face and nose. Then, he found someone else beside him. Lin Shaola. He didn't know where she slept all day, but she had come out of nowhere today. She was lying on her back drooling, holding a bag of sweets in one hand, and slapping him with the other. Rinpochen covered his face as he got up from the ground. He could smell the smell of alcoholic chocolate coming from Lin Shaola's mouth. He also saw the wrappers scattered on the ground. Looking at her face, which was a little red, Rinpochen felt that she might have drunk too much. She had drunk too much alcoholic chocolate. She couldn't drink alcohol. Not at all. Rinpochen opened the bag and found that all the alcoholic chocolate was gone. He casually threw the bag back into her hands. He wanted to give her a kick, but he didn't kick her when he saw her acting like a little girl. Rinpochen sighed and felt that he was quite unlucky to have gotten into trouble while he was sleeping. He walked out to stretch and saw that the empress and Qi Ziding were still sitting there. The sun was setting, but the two of them were still sitting there talking about something. Looking at this scene, one couldn't tell that one was the current empress, and the other was said to be a bloodthirsty murderer who assassinated the previous emperor for the throne. This scene was too harmonious. Although the two of them were close relatives and hadn't seen each other for 10 years, it was normal for them to talk a lot. Now, Rinpochen understood that the empress didn't actually talk a lot. She started to talk more when she was with him. Now, looking at her and Qi sitting in front of the grave. Chapter 749. At night, a small bowl of amber-colored viscous liquid was placed in front of Rinpochen. It emitted a tempting and sweet fragrance. The sweet scent of flowers filled the entire house. It could even be smelled from outside the house, making people salivate. When the scent reached the nose, it was as if it could reach the brain. It made people feel light all over and swept away any fatigue. It was a nest of honey from the golden ring bees. 2 honeycombs, which were half the size of a human, were cut open and filled a jar of this honey. A bowl of this honey was worth thousands of gold taels in the Yun nation, not to mention this jar. After careful calculation, Rinpochen's 100,000 taels of silver were well spent, and he even gained the favor of many winged cavalry warriors. The two of them sat quietly at the table with a wooden bowl in front of them. Both of them stared at the bowls in front of them as if they were doing some kind of pre-meal ritual. Rinpochen remembered someone saying that life should have a sense of ritual and that ordinary life would feel different. However, the difference was that the empress had half a bowl of honey while he only had half a bowl. Although this honey was precious, he couldn't eat too much with his current strength. "Can you eat it?" the empress asked without looking up. If Rinpochen hadn't stopped her, she wouldn't have been able to hold back. This was her favorite dessert. If she had to choose between Rinpochen and dessert, she might choose him after some hesitation. If she had to choose between Tong Jinye or any other big shots in the imperial court and dessert, she would choose dessert without a second thought. She had already made a huge concession by enduring for so long. "Let's eat." As soon as Rinpochen finished speaking, the empress had already taken a finger-sized piece of chocolate honeycomb and put it into her mouth. Accompanied by the crisp sound of chewing, she closed her eyes and revealed an intoxicated look. Although Rinpochen was also very greedy, sweets weren't as attractive to him as they were to the empress. He was able to watch the empress eat with a smile and then mimic her actions. The honeycomb was a honeycomb used to extract honey. It was broken into small pieces by the people in the imperial kitchen and put into the mouth with honey. It was extremely rich and filled with various fragrances of flowers that filled the entire taste buds. Rinpochen tasted it carefully and could actually detect the fragrance of several flowers. Furthermore, the honey was sweet but not greasy. The aroma filled his mouth and made him feel as though he was tasting the taste of spring. The honeycomb, on the other hand, was like a biscuit. It was slightly crispy and fragrant. It was a perfect match with honey. Rinpoche couldn't help but close his eyes and carefully savor the feeling in his mouth. Even after swallowing, the fragrance of the flowers and honey lingered in his mouth for a long time. It was as if the honey was still in his mouth, but it lacked the crispness of the honeycomb. However, he felt that it was slightly imperfect. As the second mouthful of honey entered his mouth, Rinpoche felt that the light feeling he had when he first smelled the honey was even more obvious. His body seemed to have become lighter. When more than half of the honey in the bowl was gone, Rinpoche felt as though he had become an immortal. He felt as though he could fly at any time. An indescribable sense of comfort and excitement stimulated his brain in waves. He seemed to hear the sound of music in his ears. It was 1,000 times better than the sound of his eru. It was like the sound of an immortal. Rinpoche shook his head to wake himself up. He looked up at the Empress and saw that the wooden bowl in his hand had been emptied. The Empress's face was flushed and her eyes looked a little hazy as if she was drunk. "Your Majesty, you are drunk from the honey," Rinpoche teased. "Ugh." The Empress hiccuped for the first time. Her mouth was filled with the fragrance of honey and flowers. It made people want to kiss her and see if her red lips were as sweet and fragrant. "This honey tastes a little strange. It feels like I have drunk alcohol." The Empress wanted to sober herself up, but she couldn't. Waves of pleasure that came from an unknown source attacked her brain, causing her to groan softly. This groan sounded extremely tempting to Rinpoche's ears. However, he still focused his attention on the bowl in front of him. "It's extremely delicious. If this was placed on Earth, I wonder how many people would fight over it." Rinpoche gave a thumbs up. He had eaten the legendary bear paw when he was young. It was the fattest right paw, and it was said that it was brought over by his father's classmate from the greater Shingon Mountains. However, compared to this honey, it wasn't worth comparing at all. Rinpoche used the last piece of beehive to carefully scoop up the remaining honey in the wooden bowl. Every strand of honey was smeared on the beehive before Rinpoche put the beehive into his mouth with satisfaction. After eating it, he still felt like it wasn't enough. However, he was satisfied when he thought of the jar of honey left. However, he finally understood why the Empress seemed to be drunk. His head was also dizzy, and everything he saw began to have double shadows. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but the bowl on the table suddenly moved to the side. It was as if the bowl had 2 legs and was trying to escape. "It actually wants to escape? I want to see what's up to this." Rinpoche laughed heartily. Seeing that the bowl was about to jump off the table, he suddenly stretched out his hands, but the feeling of touching the bowl didn't appear at all. He grabbed empty air. Rinpoche was stunned. He carefully looked at the table and found that the bowl was actually still in its original position as if it had never been moved. Rinpoche didn't believe it and lifted the bowl, but found nothing underneath it. "That's strange." Rinpoche was a little puzzled. He looked up at the Empress and couldn't take his eyes off her. He saw the Empress sitting there in a daze looking at him. Her pretty face was like jade, and her flame-like red lips were especially attractive. This made his adrenaline surge. In addition, the celestial music that came to his ears kept brewing his emotions. An inexplicable impulse surged into his body. "Your Majesty, The Empress's reaction seemed to be a little slow, but Rinpoche couldn't care less about such things. Rinpoche walked around the table, held the Empress's face, and said, "Your Majesty must be very sweet now." After finishing his sentence, he didn't wait for the Empress to reply and lowered his head. "It's indeed very sweet," Rinpoche thought to himself. This was a soul-stirring kiss that lasted until the end of time. Rinpoche couldn't bear to leave the Empress's red lips, and her hands were placed on his waist. This made it even more difficult for him to control himself. He blacked out. When he woke up again, he found himself on the bed and holding a ball of softness under his palm. Pinch, pinch, pinch again. The sweet smell of her breath gently blew against his face. Rinpoche saw the Empress beside him with the help of the dim light in the room. A red muslin was hanging at the corner of the bed. Her white inner garment was half undone, revealing a touch of fullness. Renbachien carefully moved his hand away and took a look. It was as if he was looking at an exquisite jade sculpture, which made his heart beat like a flame. Oh! The Empress snorted softly and turned her body. Renbachien was immediately drenched from head to toe with a basin of ice water. He jumped off the bed as if he had seen a ghost, lay on the ground, and pretended to be asleep. Will the Empress fly into a rage out of humiliation when she wakes up? Oh no. I don't know anything. What exactly happened at that time? I only remember kissing the Empress. What happened after that? Why can't I remember anything? Fake wine is harmful, and fake honey is going to kill. Damn it, there's something wrong with this honey. Why didn't I realize it at that time? It shouldn't be. Such a strong reaction, that tide-like pleasure and excitement, that light feeling, that celestial music. How is this honey? Renbachien's mind was spinning frantically. That feeling made him feel that it was something that was strictly forbidden on Earth. He should have realized it earlier. However, the excitement brought about by the honey made him completely forget about it. The Empress turned over on the bed, causing him to hold his breath as his heart thumped wildly. He jumped off the bed, but didn't notice that the Empress's neck and ears were completely red. Her half-undone inner garment revealed her skin, which was dyed rosy. Chapter 750. It was a torturous night for Renbachien. He obviously couldn't sleep, but he didn't dare to move. He even had to breathe softly so as not to wake the Empress. He was thinking about the scene he saw and the lingering sensation on his hand. He was also worried that the Empress would fly into a rage out of humiliation when she woke up. Their marriage had already been decided and they had even talked about it in front of the Empress's mother's grave. However, the Empress was extremely shy in this regard. It was difficult for them to make much progress before the wedding. Renbachien was already aware of this. Anyway, there were only a few months left, so he wasn't in a hurry. He didn't expect such a situation to occur because of such a small bowl of fake honey. On the contrary, it made him feel a little apprehensive. Although the harvest was big enough, the danger was greater than the harvest. Marx once said that it would dare to commit any crime for 300% profit, even at the risk of being hanged. However, Renbachien felt that it would be too unjust if he was buried by the angry Empress after just holding her hand once, twice, thrice. Therefore, the best choice now was to pretend to be dead. After an unknown period of time, Renbachien shut his eyes tightly and heard a soft groan from the bed, followed by the sound of the Empress getting up. The Empress sat there for a moment and put on her clothes. Renbachien's mind gradually outlined the details of the Empress's movements. Then, the Empress kicked Renbachien awake. "Oh, it hurts," Renbachien said with sleepy eyes. "What happened last night?" the Empress asked faintly. "What happened? I don't know." Renbachien looked at the Empress blankly. At this time, the Empress had put on her white undergarments and red veil. She was staring at him with flickering eyes. "What happened?" Renbachien asked. "Nothing." The Empress shifted her gaze away and appeared at the door in a flash. Seeing the Empress's actions, Renbachien secretly heaved a sigh of relief and gave himself a thumbs up. She was indeed worthy of being the best actor. The Empress opened the door with her eyes flickering. She felt tiny beads of sweat on her back. With her strength, this was simply impossible. "Your Majesty, why is your face a little red?" Qing Yuan asked curiously from the side while carrying a wooden basin. The Empress glared at her fiercely, but her voice didn't reveal any clues. She casually asked, "Your face is red?" Qing Yuan was kicked by Hong Luan. She lowered her head and said, "I saw wrongly." The morning sun shone on His Majesty's face, making it look slightly red. "What happened to Her Majesty?" Renbachien asked as he walked out of the room. "I'm fine." The Empress waved her hand and got them to help her wash up. "If Your Majesty's face is a little redder, I'm sure it will look very good." Renbachien laughed. Although he had suffered for a whole night, he was in high spirits, mainly because of the effects of the honey. Just a little bit of it could make a person feel 100 times more energetic. This honey had a very strong stimulant effect. However, if it was just a little more, the situation from last night would occur. Excitement, pleasure, and all kinds of hallucinations, even fragments. After breakfast, the group prepared to leave. However, only 300 of the winged cavalry warriors would leave with the Empress. The other 300 would head in other directions to various villages. Including Gongzheng, they still had a mission from the Empress: replenish the winged cavalry. This wasn't just to replenish the winged cavalry. This time, the Empress was going to expand the winged cavalry to 4,000 people. After all, Daeyeou's food production had greatly increased, and the Yun nation was about to fall into their hands. No matter how big the appetite of the winged cavalry warriors was, they could now raise more. The direction that the Empress and Rinpochen were heading in was considered a barren and treacherous forest in the 60,000 mountains. There were almost no villages, so they simply split into two groups. Rinpochen and the Empress would go to the place that Librarian Lin had mentioned, while the other 300 people would go to the depths of the 60,000 mountains under Gongzheng's lead to recruit Kismet Heaven experts. While everyone was packing, Rinpochen saw that the people from the imperial kitchen had actually put the jar of honey on the backs of their mounts. He quickly said, "You don't have to bring this. Sir, the honey of the golden ring bee is very precious. It would be a pity to throw it away," the people from the imperial kitchen said. Rinpochen thought about it. This honey was indeed good stuff, but he didn't know if it would be addictive. Otherwise, it would be excellent to drink some during the bridal chamber. After all, we have to walk on the mountain road and can easily break it. I'll leave it here and take it when I come back. At this time, he was glad that he had hidden this from the Empress. Otherwise, he didn't know what her reaction would be. As for using it during the bridal chamber, it didn't matter. Qi Ziding had already heard about this from the Empress, so he wasn't surprised to see everyone ready to set off. Instead, he sent them off to the front of the village. Accompanying him was a burly man in his 50s. There was a claw mark on his neck that tore open his skin, but he was lucky to be alive. However, the sound of his breathing was different from that of an ordinary person. It seemed that his trachea had been injured when he was clawed by the beast. This man carried a bow that was half the height of an average person on his back and led a strange-looking mount. It had antlers and a dog's face, but it had the body of a tiger. Its fur was covered with camouflage-like stripes, and it had a dog's tail. His name is Yasheng, and he has been to the most places in the village besides me. He has also been to the place that you want to go and can lead the way for you. I won't be accompanying you. In any case, that place isn't very dangerous for you, and you still have to come back when you return. The Empress sat on Qi Shui's back and nodded. There's no need to send me off. I'll be back in a few days. Then she ordered everyone, set off. Everyone, who was already prepared, immediately set off. For the rest of the journey, Rinpochen spent less time with the Empress and would read a book when he had nothing to do. On the one hand, he felt guilty. On the other hand, he wanted to read the yang boosting technique, again so that he could memorize all the details. According to Librarian Lin, this technique was easy to understand, and the most difficult part was to nurture the human furnace. However, Rinpochen didn't dare to let his guard down. They traveled in the southwest direction for 7 days. This section of the road was 100 times more difficult than before. There were deep mountains, dangerous rivers, and strange rocks everywhere. The 60,000 mountains was already a barren land, but this area was even more desolate and dangerous. The surrounding trees blocked out the sun, and the sky was almost invisible. There were no roads in many places, and the weeds were taller than people. They had to rely on Yasheng, the guide sent by Qi Ziding, to lead the way. On this day, as they were advancing, they suddenly heard a roar that sounded like a lion or a tiger. The sound was so loud that it sounded like a drum being beaten beside their ears. Even though they were thousands of meters away, they could still feel the unparalleled ferocity of the beast. Rinpochen subconsciously approached the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, there seems to be a big guy in front." After being in the 60,000 mountains for so long, he could gradually distinguish the strength of some beasts. Although he had never encountered this beast in front of him, he knew that it wasn't to be trifled with just from its might. Moreover, after hearing this roar, the crow general that Rinpoche was sitting on also became vigilant. One had to know that the crow general was a cardinal heaven-level beast and was even more powerful than an ordinary cardinal heaven expert. Only the Empress could subdue it. Even it behaved like this after hearing the roar. From this, it could be seen that the beast in front was definitely extremely powerful. Chapter 751. Yisheng's words caused a commotion. The winged cavalry warriors in the team were all recruited from the 60,000 mountains. Many of them had heard of the Xiongyan when they were in the village. The aboriginals who visited the village mentioned it as a legend. It was said that 1,300 kilometers south of the Ya family village, there was a red mountain called Two Mountain. Some people said that a long time ago, there was a group of ferocious beasts on the mountain that were even more powerful than cardinal heaven experts. They wreaked havoc everywhere and destroyed many villages. Later on, an aboriginal expert gathered the troops of many villages to attack and exterminate the group of beasts. The expert died on the spot, and many villages also suffered heavy casualties. That mountain was dyed red by the blood of the aboriginals and ferocious beasts that perished. Ever since that battle, not even a blade of grass grew on Two Mountain. In the past 100 years, Two Mountain was occupied by another ferocious beast. It was a Xiongyan. It was more than 20 meters tall, had a human-like face, and was covered in short black hair. There was a silver line on its back, and it had no tail. It could walk upright. This ferocious beast destroyed a nearby village as soon as it appeared. However, it stayed within 50 kilometers of Two Mountain and didn't cause any more casualties. Furthermore, it was very powerful, so no one went to attack it. However, it was rumored that this ferocious beast was bloodthirsty. Unlike other ferocious beasts that killed for food, this ferocious beast killed for pleasure. Hence, it was called Xiongyan. Are you sure it's a Xiongyan? Gong Zheng frowned as he looked at the dense forest in front of them. I should be right. I went to the vicinity of Two Mountain and saw a Xiongyan once. However, it was quite a distance away and it was hunting a ferocious beast that trespassed into its territory. That's why I ran away when it wasn't paying attention, Yisheng said with an ugly expression. Yisheng said with an ugly expression. When he recalled the ferocious might of the huge ferocious beast, he felt perturbed in his heart. Is there any other way? Gong Zheng asked again. If we take a detour, we will have to walk for at least a week and pass through the venomous worm valley. Gong Zheng's expression became even uglier. Venomous worms were palm-sized insects that weren't powerful. The problem was that they appeared in groups, and many ferocious beasts avoided them. Furthermore, it was rumored that venomous worms were everywhere in the venomous worm valley. For this team, it was a greater threat than the Xiongyan. Come with me to see His Majesty. After listening to their conversation, the Empress pondered for a while and asked, How powerful is that Xiongyan? Your Majesty, there was a cardinal heaven expert in the village that was destroyed. He disappeared with the destruction of the village, so he probably didn't manage to escape. Yisheng recalled the rumors from back then, and a trace of fear appeared in his eyes. One had to know that cardinal heaven experts were like gods in the eyes of the aboriginals. They could be said to be the top experts. However, such an expert had perished before the Xiongyan. He hadn't even been able to escape. It was clear how terrifying the Xiongyan was. As Rinpoche listened, he had some other ideas. That cardinal heaven expert probably died to protect the village or to buy time for the ordinary people in the village. Although that Xiongyan was powerful, it shouldn't be so powerful that it was far more powerful than a cardinal heaven expert, to the point where it couldn't even run away. After all, this was only the middle layer of the 60,000 mountains, and they were still very far away from the deeper layers. There weren't many cardinal heaven beasts in this area, let alone such a powerful one. However, just in case, Rinpoche said, Your Majesty, why don't we go back and not go to the spiritual spring? If we were to encounter danger and lose manpower because of this matter, It would be a great loss. The Empress glanced at him and said, "I'm going to take a look. I want to see how powerful that Xiong Yen is." "Your Majesty!" Gong Zheng hurriedly stopped her. "Don't try to persuade me. I'm just going to take a look." The Empress waved her hand. "Your Majesty, I'll go with you," Renbaqian immediately said. Gong Zheng squinted at Renbaqian. "Are you going to be a burden? If Her Majesty and I don't come back in 2 hours, you can go back a day's journey and wait for 3 days. We will definitely come back," Renbaqian said to Gong Zheng. The Empress immediately understood what Renbaqian meant. "Your Majesty, please wait a moment." Renbaqian thought that it was better to bring Lin Xiaola along. At least she could be used as a meat shield. The beasts were still roaring in the distance, which made Gong Zheng even more worried. Beasts wouldn't keep roaring like this. Usually, they would only roar like this when they encountered a strong enemy that was even stronger than them. Could it be that there was a beast that was as strong as the Xiongyan? When did the middle area of the 60,000 mountains become so dangerous? Renbaqian followed the group and found Lin Xiaola, who was lying on the back of the jumping goat. Then he kicked her in the small buttocks. Lin Xiaola jumped up and gave him a claw. Although Renbaqian sensed that something was wrong and tried his best to shrink back, he still felt a chill on his face. Then he felt a tingling sensation and warm liquid flowing on his face. Lin Xiaola's nails were about an inch long as she glared at Renbaqian. "I woke you up to eat sweets?" Renbaqian said calmly. He was already used to the wounds on his face and just needed to apply some ointment. "Oh." Lin Xiaola was furious a second ago, but she calmed down a second later. Although she didn't know when she would receive such benefits, it was always good to have sweets. Even if she was kicked in her sleep, she wouldn't be so angry. Renbaqian grabbed a handful of white rabbit creamy candies and threw them to her. "I have something to do. Follow me." He brought Lin Xiaola to meet the Empress and asked everyone to stay where they were while the three of them entered the dense forest ahead. The trees in the forest were dozens of meters tall, and the various plants on the ground were as tall as a person. It would be difficult for an ordinary person to move an inch here, but it didn't affect the three of them much. The Empress and Lin Xiaola's figures flashed on the tree branches. Renbaqian had to pull the vines on the tree from time to time and had to slow down the two people in front of him to barely keep up. A distance of more than 1,000 meters wasn't considered far for the three of them, and they closed the distance in just a few minutes. The beast's roar was getting louder, and it was so deafening that it hurt their eardrums. Renbaqian leaped toward a tree branch in front of him. When he was about 3 to 4 meters away, he stretched out his hand to grab a hanging vine. However, when he grabbed it, he felt a slippery feeling that was different from the vine. That vine actually fell along with him. This gave him a fright. When he looked up again, it wasn't a vine, but a slender snake that was about 6 to 7 meters long. It was waving in his hand and trying to bite him. Swoosh! The shadow of a claw slashed across, and the snake was immediately divided into 6 parts. Lin Xiaola carried Renbaqian and kicked off the tree trunk before landing on a branch. "That gave me a fright." Renbaqian patted his chest with lingering fear. Using a snake as a vine to pull was indeed frightening. Fortunately, he wasn't bitten. One had to know that there were many venomous snakes in this mountain. Renbaqian spoke very softly for fear that the beast in front of him would hear him. However, he also knew that he probably wouldn't be able to hide from the other party at this distance. Beasts were much more sensitive than humans. Fortunately, the other party didn't know what kind of opponent it was facing and probably didn't have the opportunity to pay attention to them. After jumping 2 more branches, Renbaqian began to feel a little strange. This was because there wasn't any open space around them. There were tall trees, various vines, and all kinds of vegetation covering the ground. According to the sound, the other party should be on the ground in front of the three of them. However, that Xiongyan was said to be more than 20 meters tall and had a huge body. How could it possibly be squeezed in such a forest? However, the sound came from the underbrush diagonally below them. The three of them looked around but didn't see the huge beast that they had expected. Instead, they saw a familiar figure, the Bichi. The Beachy stood on a branch and stared blankly in a certain direction with its small eyes full of doubt. Following the Beachy's gaze, the three of them finally found the so-called Xiong Yen. A 1-meter-tall gopher with a gray head and brown other parts of its body was standing there, waving its small claws and roaring at the Beachy. As it opened its mouth, it let out a sound that didn't match its size at all. It was loud like thunder and full of ferocity. However, its body and face didn't match the sound at all. It was like a rabbit letting out the roar of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which was full of dissonance. Its playful face was now full of anger and a little puzzlement. In the past, I only needed to roar like this to make all the surrounding animals run away. Why aren't you running away? Aren't I tired of roaring? The Beachy was also dumbfounded. Why is this thing roaring at me? It's neither fighting nor running away. Why is it just standing there and roaring? Furthermore, how can this body make such a loud sound? Is this a Xiong Yen? Ren Baqien pointed at the thing that looked like a gopher and couldn't believe it. It was different from what he had described. The Empress was also puzzled. In a flash, she landed behind the gopher that was roaring at the Beachy, reached out, grabbed the back of its neck, and lifted it up. The gopher panicked at first, then turned its head and roared at the Empress. The Empress's expression became even weirder. This roar really made her feel like she was facing some kind of powerful, ferocious beast. She even subconsciously felt vigilant. However, the thing in her hand was at most at the man-will level. It couldn't struggle at all when the Empress grabbed it. Chapter 752. As the gopher in the Empress's hand inhaled, its entire body swelled up like a balloon, and a louder sound came out of its mouth. Roar! The sound wave directly blew the Empress's red muslin and fine black hair backward. Ren Baqien covered his ears from the tree trunk and was horrified. He used to use a loudspeaker in the imperial court to win people over by virtue. Therefore, he was more sensitive to the decibels of sound. He estimated that the voice of this mole creature was at least 170 decibels or more. The sound of a chainsaw was 110 decibels, and the noise of a jet plane was around 130 decibels. The noise produced by a rocket was only 160 to 170 decibels. The sound of this gopher's voice was even louder than that of a rocket. A noise of 170 decibels could not only deafen people in an instant, but it could also kill people at close range. Although it could kill ordinary people, it was enough to show the power of such a loud sound. Even an earthwheel expert would be greatly injured if he heard such a sound at close range. For example, Ren Baqien's ears buzzed with this roar, and all other sounds seemed to become softer in the distance. He was still more than 10 meters away from the gopher, and it wasn't in the direction of the gopher's roar, but he was still greatly affected. One could imagine the impact that the Empress, who was carrying it, received. Fortunately, the Empress's strength wasn't comparable to that of an ordinary person. Although she received a huge impact, she didn't suffer any injuries. Seeing that it was inhaling again, the Empress shook her hand, and the gopher immediately became like a deflated balloon. Its body that had just swelled up immediately returned to its original size. Woof, woof, woof. The Beachy barked at the gopher from the tree branch. It probably felt that the outcome was set, so it turned around and disappeared into the forest. Ren Baqien and Lin Xiaola jumped down from the tree and landed beside the Empress. Ren Baqien circled the Empress twice and sized up the mole in her hand. Then he said, "It's male." "What male?" the Empress asked in astonishment. "This fellow is male." Ren Baqien pointed at the gopher in her hand. The Empress's face immediately turned black. "You went around in circles just to figure out if this thing was male or female. You've been keeping an eye on Qi Shui and the Crow General every day, and now your first reaction when you see a ferocious beast is to look at its gender first? What kind of perverse hobby was this? But this thing's cry is really loud." Ren Baqien looked at the gopher in the Empress's hand. It was indeed a gopher. It looked extremely similar to its kind on Earth. It had a shorter mouth, 2 big front teeth, cheeks that could store food, and was chubby and drooping a little. The only difference was the color of its fur and the fact that it was slightly bigger. At this moment, his pair of small eyes were rolling around, and no one knew what he was thinking. Let's go back first, the Empress said as she held the hamster by its neck. She didn't expect that the thing that made the team so anxious was actually this thing. Your Majesty, if this thing makes a sound, it will be quite lethal. Your Majesty should be careful. It was best to kill it. To avoid any trouble, Rinpoche said. This thing wasn't like other vicious beasts. Even if it roared in your ear, you wouldn't be able to stand it. It was too dangerous. Rinpoche was taken aback when he heard this sound. He almost thought that the Bichi had returned. However, this sound came from this little thing in front of him. Woof woof. The gopher seemed to understand Rinpoche's words. Not only did its previous roar become a Bichi-like barking, but it also wasn't loud. It looked at the Empress with its teary eyes and wagged its tail vigorously. In fact, its tail was very short and was only the size of a ball. Therefore, it was more appropriate to say that it was wagging its tail or shaking its butt. Disregarding other aspects, this little thing was born with the ability to please people. Seeing this, the Empress's heart immediately softened. Women always lacked resistance toward furry things. If it was stubbornly resisting, the Empress wouldn't even think about it. However, it looked pitiful at this moment, and the Empress's heart softened. She raised the gopher in front of her face and said, "It looks like you can understand human language. If you bark randomly, no one can save you." The gophers but shook even faster. "Let's go back first," the Empress said. The three of them passed through the forest at a slower speed and returned to their original position. They saw many winged cavalry warriors standing there and looking around. Seeing that the Empress had returned, everyone immediately cheered. The Xiongyan's roar had stopped just now, but there were no sounds of fighting. As a result, everyone was still guessing what had happened. Now that the Empress had returned, everyone was relieved. The Empress returned to the carriage, called Gong Zheng and Yesheng over, and showed the gopher to them. "Is this a Xiongyan?" Yesheng shook his head like a rattle drum. "Then what is it?" "It looks like a male gopher," Yesheng said cautiously. The Empress's face darkened again. It wasn't because it was a gopher. It was because Yesheng said it was a male gopher. It was exactly the same as Rinpoche. "Why did your Majesty catch a gopher?" Both of them were puzzled. "The roar just now came from it," Rinpoche said leisurely. "Impossible." Their first reaction was disbelief. How could this thing make such a ferocious roar? Yesheng, who had seen a Xiongyan before, was even more certain that it was the gopher's roar. "Are you questioning Her Majesty? Let them hear it." Rinpoche put on a fake smile. "We don't dare." The two of them said. The gopher seemed to understand Rinpoche's words and turned to look at the Empress behind it. "Roar," the Empress said coldly. "Roar." It was like a sudden clap of thunder. The gopher's roar caused the surroundings to panic. The jumping goats led the winged cavalry warriors to run all over the mountains in a panic, as if they were herding goats. Rinpoche, Qin Yuan, Hong Yuan, Lin Xiaola, and the two people standing in front of them were the only ones left. At this moment, Qin Yuan, Hong Yuan, Gong Zheng, and Yesheng all looked pained. Although Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were behind the gopher, they were too weak. Gong Zheng and Yesheng took a direct hit as if they were hammered. They retreated a few steps, swayed, and seemed to be unable to control their bodies. The deafening noise destroyed the balance of the two of them. After the gopher finished roaring, it looked pleased with itself. It seemed that it was very confident in its voice. Rinpoche put down his hands that were covering his ears and smiled at the two of them. "How do you feel?" The two of them looked at Rinpoche blankly. Their ears were buzzing, and they couldn't hear what Rinpoche was saying. "Both of your noses are bleeding." Rinpoche pointed at the two of them. "Damn, their eyes and ears are bleeding too." Rinpoche was shocked. Did something happen to the two of them? After 7 or 8 minutes, the two of them gradually recovered, proving that it was a false alarm. However, they still had to shout when talking to the two of them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to hear him clearly. "Tell me, how should I deal with you?" the Empress asked faintly as she put the gopher down. If Ren Baqien had to describe the gopher's current expression, it would be submissive. Your Majesty, this gopher seems to be somewhat useful. Why don't you keep it for now? Ren Baqien suggested. It was more than just somewhat useful. Gong Zheng was considered extremely powerful in Kismet Heaven, but his balance was destroyed by this gopher that only knew how to roar, causing him to bleed from all his orifices. This showed the power of the gopher's roar. It was simply a living sonic weapon. The next day, Ren Baqien was a little worried that the gopher would find an opportunity to run away. However, he slowly realized that not only did the gopher not run away at night, but it was also extremely close to people. It wasn't only the Empress, but also Ren Baqien, Qin Yuan, Hong Luan, and everyone else. Qin Yuan and Hong Luan laughed and kept rubbing the gopher's belly. It also liked to turn over and let people touch it. Even if Ren Baqien flicked its penis, this gopher seemed to be born to please people. Ren Baqien gave it a name, Roaring Emperor. Ren Baqien felt that this name couldn't be more appropriate. In addition, he realized that this gopher seemed to be able to imitate the sounds of other creatures. Not only did it bark like the beachy, but it also made the sound of a jumping sheep. Furthermore, it imitated it very well. If one closed their eyes and listened to it, it really sounded like a jumping sheep. Even the winged cavalry couldn't distinguish it. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.